Chapter 297. Out of the 18 layers of the Carefree Heart Sutra, the first 6 layers belonged to the early Qi practitioner realm. The 6 layers of the early Qi practitioner realm were different as well. The first layer was the most crucial. It was the transformation from a regular person to a Qi practitioner. It was a fundamental transformation. However, this threshold stopped most people. Without the tempering of the first strand of true Qi, they would never truly become a Qi practitioner. It was the same with the cultivation of inner force. If one could not feel the sense of Qi, they would not be able to touch the threshold of inner force. It was just that this threshold was slightly lower than that of Qi practitioners from the path of immortals. Apart from the first layer, the 5th and 6th layers were also very crucial. This was because the early stage of the aura refining realm could be advanced by relying on the accumulation of essential Qi. The middle stage and the late stage of the aura refining realm could only be advanced by relying on comprehension and cultivation. Advancing from the early stage of the aura refining realm to the middle stage of the aura refining realm was a change in cultivation methods. The reason why the 5th and 6th layers were crucial was because they were the beginning of the transformation from the accumulation of true Qi to comprehension. If one relied purely on the accumulation of true Qi, they would be able to advance to the final 2 layers of the early Qi practitioner realm, but reaching the 7th layer of the mid-Qi practitioner realm would be fraught with difficulties. They would not be able to continue. It was also because of this that Zhong Xiaohua could not advance any further when she reached the 4th layer. She had always been accumulating. If she did not have the bit of comprehension that she had gained from seeing through life and death, she might have been able to advance to the final 2 layers of the early Qi practitioner realm if she had only relied on the innate energy of the world within the crouching ox rock after being struck by the acquired lightning. However, there would be less potential to be unearthed in the future, so the path would become narrower and narrower. Perhaps she would reach the end of her cultivation very soon. Fortunately, back in the Guozhuang house, Liu Qian had already planted the seed of immortality in Zhong Xiaohua's heart. His grandmother's death had watered him with spring water of regret. His attachment to his family had watered him with spring water of anticipation. The cultivation of the Carefree Heart Sutra had provided him with possible fertilizer. Seeing the skeletons of the seniors from the path of immortals on this desolate island had given him a sliver of comprehension towards the path of life and death. It was this sliver of comprehension that ignited the eruption of all the accumulated energy. This eruption was like a single spark that could set a prairie ablaze. It propelled Zhong Xiaohua's cultivation to skyrocket, step by step. If Zhong Xiaohua had the support of the energy of the world within the crouching ox rock right now, she would definitely have been able to easily break through from the 4th layer to the 5th layer, and then from the 5th layer to the 6th layer. That was not all. She could have easily broken through to the 7th or 8th layer of mid-Qi practitioner. However, the path of immortality was about taking things one step at a time. Solidifying one's foundation was the most important principle. Breaking through several layers so easily was a delightful act, but it was also a great taboo of the path of immortality. It was in accordance with the rules of the path of immortality. It would inevitably cause irreparable damage to her future cultivation. But now, Zhong Xiaohua had understood. She did not have the time to take out the crouching ox rock from her money pouch and draw Qi into her body as easily as before. Just by drawing in the faint, warm energy from the cave was in accordance with the rules of the path of immortality. Refining true Qi through water, her foundation was incomparably firm. Even if she could not break through today, the day of her breakthrough was just around the corner. Moreover, in the later years of the path of immortality, the energy of the world was still scarce. Zhong Xiaohua was unable to draw Qi from the world into her body and complete the refinement of the initial stage of Qi practitioner. The initial stage of Qi practitioner was the foundation of the path of immortality. It was the most crucial aspect. Apart from the reasons mentioned above, there was another reason for this. It was to turn the unfamiliar energy of the world into the familiar true Qi through the refinement of her meridians. This process was extremely important. It was to train the meridian's ability to refine the energy of the world. This ability was the ability to convert different types of energy into one's own true Qi. The energy of the world, at its most basic level, consisted of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. When the path of immortality flourished, these 5 types of energy were all mixed together. When Qi practitioners drew Qi into their bodies, they could not just absorb a single type or not absorb a single type. This type of drawing Qi could very easily refine the ability of the meridians, establishing a good foundation for future cultivation. The absorption of the energy of the 5 elements was common knowledge in the path of immortality in the past. There was no need to mention it at all. As a result, there were no records of it in the Carefree Heart Sutra. None of the Qi practitioners paid any attention to it, or were aware of it. However, in this era where the path of immortality had been destroyed, the energy of the world had basically been completely wiped out, so how could there be any energy of the 5 elements? Zhong Xiaohua could draw in pure energy from the heavenly lightning to temper his body. Although this type of energy that did not contain any energy of the 5 elements could still be used for cultivation, and it was very beneficial to Zhong Xiaohua who did not possess any true qi. It could directly raise his foundation as a qi practitioner by a level, allowing him to reach a height that the qi practitioners of the path of immortality could never hope to reach in the beginning of the path of immortality. However, this pure energy also directly caused Zhong Xiaohua's true qi to lack any energy of the 5 elements. This flaw was not obvious right now, but it would become apparent as he progressed. As for the origin stones that Zhong Xiaohua relied on to advance to the early qi refining stage, they contained the energy of the world, which was abundant in earth elemental energy. Right now, most of the true qi in his meridians was earth elemental true qi. Of course, although it was miserable for Zhong Xiaohua to be stranded on a desolate island in the middle of the sea, one of the benefits of his journey on the sea and cultivation on this desolate island was that he could draw in the water elemental energy of the world into his body. Although it wasn't much, it was still better than nothing. Oh right, Zhong Xiaohua had also eaten a fasting pill. Although it was a pill of the lowest grade, it still contained an extremely tiny amount of wood elemental energy. It could be considered as truly meager effort to gather the 5 elements for Zhong Xiaohua. Even though Zhong Xiaohua already knew how to concoct pills, who knew how long it would take for him to refine the pill and circulate his energy again? Presumably, by that time, Zhong Xiaohua would have already broken free and escaped from this desolate island to return to the mainland. With his current cultivation speed, he would have long reached the mid-qi refining stage. By then, replenishing his wood elemental true qi would no longer be a regrettable matter of mending the pen after the sheep were lost. This faint pool was filled with scorching energy of the world. It was the rare fire-attributed energy of the world. As soon as the fire-attributed energy entered her body, it immediately replenished the attribute of the true qi in Zhong Xiaohua's meridians. She was already a level higher than other qi practitioners at the beginning of qi practitioners' cultivation. Only now did the importance of a starting point become evident. The true qi in her body went from pure to full of the 5 elements. The true qi of the 5 elements reinforced and countered each other in her meridians, constantly evolving. Not only did it stabilize her meridians, but it also allowed the true qi to evolve on its own in her meridians, forming a cycle of the 5 elements. How could a qi practitioner who had cultivated the path of immortality in the past have had such a fortuitous encounter? Ever since then, as the energy of the world gradually thickened, the energy of the various elements gradually mixed together. It was impossible for another fortuitous encounter like Zhong Xiaohua's. There had never been anyone like her before, nor would there be anyone like her in the future. That was exactly how it was. Moreover, the newly born true qi of the 5 elements was extremely abundant. It continued to flicker forward, but the true qi had evolved on its own, so it moved much faster as well. Before she knew it, she had already charged towards the bottleneck of the 5th layer of the Carefree mantra. Due to the accumulation from before and the sharpness of the newly born true qi, the breakthrough from the 3rd layer to the 5th layer was extraordinarily smooth. The true qi arrived at her acupoints, and after knocking on them, she reached a higher level. The abundant true qi opened up brand new meridians as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. By the time Zhong Xiaohua's mantra reached the 5th layer of the Carefree mantra, he was guiding the fire-type vital qi from the cave into his body. It was not like the vital qi from the crouching ox rock, which was vast and unstoppable. Instead, it was like a gurgling stream that flowed endlessly. This was the qi refinement mantra that was compatible with the way of the immortals. The true qi slowly refined his meridians, pushing his cultivation level up bit by bit. After an indeterminate amount of time, Zhong Xiaohua's motionless body twitched slightly. Then, his eyes suddenly opened. The fire in the depths of his eyes disappeared in a flash. Shortly after, he sighed slightly and stood up. According to his original plan, if he were to cultivate on the crouching ox rock, he would definitely be able to break through to the 6th layer of the qi refinement mantra. However, purely guiding the vital qi from heaven and earth into his body was much slower. He had only just entered the middle of the 5th layer of the qi refinement mantra. However, just as he stood up and stretched his body, he heard a series of crunching sounds coming from within his body. Zhong Xiaohua felt that he had grown a little taller. In addition, the true qi in his meridians had always felt heavy and heavy. Now, he could feel liveliness within it. Yes, there was even life. True qi could change emotions too? Zhong Xiaohua was somewhat stunned. However, he didn't have much time to think about these things, because he pulled out a small sword from his pocket and impatiently drove it towards the luminous pearl on the stone wall. Just now, there was a senior skeleton in the cave, so Zhong Xiaohua was a little embarrassed to take action. Now that he was alone, how could he resist? Luckily, he had some experience in driving his sword to kill seabirds in the past year. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult to pry the luminous pearl off the tall stone wall without any damage. Zhong Xiaohua only laughed out loud when all the night luminescent pearls on the wall were removed, leaving not a single source of light behind. This senior from the immortal path is really interesting. There's nothing to admire in this cave, so why did he leave these luminous pearls? If he wanted to look, he could have just used his divine sense. Why waste such a precious thing? But after he released his divine sense for a while, he realized that something was wrong. Divine sense was useful, but there were also particular circumstances when it could be used. How could he use his divine sense all the time? Moreover, what he saw with his divine sense was different from what he saw with his eyes. Without any other choice, Zhong Xiaohua reluctantly took out a few more from his money pouch and put them back in their original places. At this time, there was a faint light in the cave again. When there was light, Zhong Xiaohua's eyes then focused on the few jade slips on the long stone table. That's right, just now when he used his divine sense, he could only see that there was a red restriction. He couldn't see what was inside. He could only see clearly with his eyes. Those were a few jade slips. Divine sense wasn't omnipotent. Please accept, please tip, thank you. Chapter 298. There were a total of 6 jade slips on the stone table, lying there quietly and plainly. If Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense had not been blocked by the restriction, he would have really thought that these jade slips were the same as the jade slips in the cave last time, without any obstruction. Zhong Xiaohua's pupils contracted a little. The jade slip last time recorded alchemy techniques. Although it was basic, I had studied it for almost a year and had just gotten the hang of it. There are still a lot of things that I haven't learned. There are actually 6 jade slips here all of a sudden. What are the things recorded in them? There was only a money bag and jade slips in the cave, presumably left behind by the immortal Dao senior casually. And there is the senior's corpse in this cave, presumably these jade slips are all the senior's belongings. Hee, I'm rich. There must be things recorded in them about the immortal Dao. Cultivation methods. Pill recipes. Formations. Zhong Xiaohua guessed all the things he had heard about the immortal Dao, and the saliva at the side of his mouth flowed all over the floor. But why isn't there a money bag here? Strange, there are only a few jade slips. If there is a money bag, wouldn't I be able to make a windfall? Looking at the luminous pearl in this senior's cave, I know that he must be rich. TSK, where did the money bag go? The moneygrubber Zhong Xiaohua actually did not immediately pay attention to the things on the stone table, but looked left and right, and used his divine sense to search the cave carefully again, but did not find anything like a bag. Instead, he found a trace of obscure primordial qi in the depths of the cave. He wanted to immerse his divine sense in to observe, but was suddenly repelled. Oh, it must be another restriction. This senior is quite good at playing hide-and-seek. The cave is full of restrictions, interesting, but fortunately, this luminous pearl does not have any restrictions. Zhong Xiaohua pinched his chin and looked thoughtfully at the jade slips on the stone table. Then, he stretched out his hand, and as expected, when his hand reached out to the invisible restriction, it could not go any further. That hand looked very strange and pressed on an empty place. Zhong Xiaohua touched it with her hand. It was very elastic. She pinched it with 2 fingers and it bounced back. It felt good. Although in the divine sense, it felt like a layer of membrane, Zhong Xiaohua didn't intend to use brute force to deal with this enchantment with bare hands. Don't we have a weapon to break enchantments? Why should we use force to subdue others? As he thought about this, his left hand took out a small sword from his bosom, and a smile appeared on his face. Let's use our swords to convince people. As he spoke, Zhong Xiaohua stabbed the small sword in his hand at the orange restriction. However, because he was close to it, the small sword in his hand was moving from top to bottom. He did not use the nameless sword technique that he was used to. As a result, when the small sword pierced the restriction, the transparent restriction suddenly emitted a faint brilliance, just like the one at the entrance of the cave. With a slight flicker, the small sword was bounced back. Zhong Xiaohua was shocked. What's going on? Could it be that the method we used to break the restriction no longer works here? Then wouldn't I be looking at a pile of delicious food for nothing and not be able to open my mouth? What a waste. But just now, I used the small sword to break the restriction. Didn't I do it before? Why doesn't it work here? Zhong Xiaohua lowered her head regretfully. After thinking carefully, she suddenly slapped her head. Oh, how could I forget this? The previous 2 times I used the sword technique, a warm current flowed from my left arm into the small sword. This time, it didn't. Is this the reason? Thinking about this, Zhong Xiaohua passed the small sword to her right hand and stabbed it at the restriction. As expected, it was blocked again. It should be like this. It seems that the thing that can break the restriction is not this small sword, but that warm current. Then, holding the small sword with her left hand, she casually used the nameless sword technique to stab at the transparent restriction. This time, the warm current flowed to the small sword. When the tip of the sword pierced the restriction flickered rapidly. Then, there seemed to be a soft pop sound. The restriction burst like a bubble. In her divine sense, a rich fire elemental energy rushed to her face and then drifted away in the air. Feeling this elemental energy in her divine sense, Zhong Xiaohua was not shocked but happy. She was originally very worried that this jade slip would be like the jade slip of the earth escape technique. Due to the loss of elemental energy, many things could not be seen. Since there was so much elemental energy in this restriction, of course it would be very useful to protect the jade slip. She could not help but feel a sense of respect for this unknown immortal senior again. The broken restriction on the stone table seemed to have disappeared. Unlike the restriction at the entrance of the cave, it could not be restored. Zhong Xiaohua looked at the row of 6 white and delicate jade slips in relief and excitedly stretched out her hand. The jade slip in her left hand was chubby. Zhong Xiaohua did not like it and did not choose it. Instead, she chose a pink jade slip that looked a little slender. She reached out and took it. Her fingers stroked the smooth jade slip, and she did not hesitate to immerse her divine sense into it. However, a circle of brilliance flashed across the pink jade slip. Like ripples, it suddenly bounced off Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense. Restriction. Zhong Xiaohua secretly frowned and casually put it on. Well, not on the stone table, but in her arms. How could she put it back when she had already gotten it? Then, she chose a small jade slip. It was also bounced off by the restriction and she put it in her arms. Then, she chose a tall jade slip. It was also bounced off by the restriction and she put it in her arms. Zhong Xiaohua was a little crazy. What is this? Why is there a restriction? Are you kidding me? I can use the small sword to break the restriction on the cave entrance and the stone table, but how can I break this jade slip? Only people who use their divine sense will be repelled. I can't stab the small sword into the jade slip, can I? Not to mention that I won't do such a cruel thing. Even if I did, I can't guarantee that the jade slip won't be damaged. Zhong Xiaohua vaguely understood in his heart, but he was also stubborn at this time. Even a clayman had a temper. Why did she have to listen to other people's arrangement? I'm not going to take that fat, short, and ugly jade slip. However, the remaining 3 jade slips were either smooth, concave, or bright in color. They were all restricted. She could only let Zhong Xiaohua look at them, but she could not go deeper. Zhong Xiaohua only chuckled when he put them all into his arms. I don't care whether you have a restriction or not. If you don't let me see it, I will put it away. No one can see it. I am the only one who can see it. As for whether I let others see it or not, it depends on my mood. Ha ha ha, there was only the fat jade slip left on the stone table. Zhong Xiaohua had seen jade slips before, but most of them were dim and on the verge of losing their primordial qi. Only the jade slip from the cave in the snow could be considered complete. However, that jade slip was like a rock, and he had almost thrown it away. Today, he had received so many jade slips, and they were all in different shapes. Although they were all white jade, some of them even had other colors. This difference naturally made him happy and disgusted. The first jade slip on his left hand was very ordinary. Even the jade slip was twice as thick as the others. Zhong Xiaohua picked it up and immediately knew that all his secrets and questions would be revealed in this inconspicuous piece of jade. You can't judge a book by its cover. The same goes for jade slips. They can't be judged by sight. Zhong Xiaohua picked up the jade slip and did not look at it immediately. Instead, she looked at it carefully in the cave, especially when there was a fluctuation of vitality. She paid more attention to it to make sure that she did not miss anything. Then, she sat cross-legged on the stone bed and carefully used her divine sense to look at it. As expected, her divine sense was not rejected this time. She immersed it into the jade slip. In an instant, countless ancient words swarmed into Zhong Xiaohua's mind. Zhong Xiaohua frowned slightly. She closed her eyes and looked at it patiently. The entire cave fell into a dead silence. Only the faint brilliance of the luminous pearl was emitted day and night. After an unknown period of time, Zhong Xiaohua, who was sitting cross-legged, sighed. Then, she slowly opened her eyes and looked at the jade slip in her hand with a complicated expression. Venerable Fire Dragon, he's actually a cultivator in the middle stage of foundation establishment. Could it be that foundation establishment is the stage after qi refining? It should be. Didn't the jade slip say that after cultivating qi for more than 60 years, he was lucky enough to succeed in foundation establishment and received the title of Venerable? He's one of the few experts in the Chengxiao continent. Where is this Chengxiao continent? Is it where I'm staying now? Yes, this is the name from 10,000 years ago. It's changed a long time ago. However, I only know Yudu and Pingyang City. I don't remember the name of this continent. It's recorded in travels. It seems to be the Lai Wu continent. It's from the divine continent. Cultivating qi for more than 60 years. This venerable fire dragon's aptitude is ordinary. He's only at the 18th level of qi refining. If it takes 3 years to reach the next level, then it would take 48 years. 4 years to reach the next level. But in 72 years, I actually passed the 5th level in just 2 years. Sigh, it's not good to be too smart. Zhong Xiaohua's tail couldn't help but curl up a little. Oh, the heavens and earth changed drastically, the qi of vitality plummeted, and the immortal Tao was destroyed. The immortal cultivators were looking for a way to escape. They worked together to build the heavenly door, but to no avail. Hence, they all looked for their own way out. Venerable Fiery Dragon was a rogue cultivator and did not belong to any sect. Previously, he did not find a suitable successor. When the immortal puppet appeared, he was still alone. Hence, he had no choice but to leave all his belongings in his cave abode in the Fei LV mountain range. Sigh, old fire, why did you leave Fei LV mountain range? Don't you know to bring money with you? Who knows where Fei LV mountain range is if you don't keep it tight? Who knows where the Fei LV mountain range is? That restriction of yours is something that no one can enter. Isn't that a waste of resources? You didn't inherit the virtue of living a simple life. Sigh, Zhong Xiaohua didn't think that this cave full of luminous pearl didn't have a trace of living a simple life. Chapter 299. It turned out that before Venerable Fiery Dragon went out to sea, he had the intention of letting someone else inherit his orthodoxy. Hence, he left all his cultivation techniques and magic treasures in his cave abode for the fated person to inherit. Although the jade bamboo slip recorded the mountain range where the cave abode was located, it did not record its exact location. Not to mention the thousands of years of vicissitudes, the mountain range might not even exist. Even if the cave abode was still there, its name would have changed many times. How could Zhong Xiaohua search for it in such a huge mainland with countless of mountain ranges? This left Zhong Xiaohua with a heart full of regrets. She could only blame Venerable Fiery Dragon for being unscrupulous. When Venerable Fiery Dragon went out to sea, although he was already in the foundation establishment stage, he could already ride on his sword or use other spells to fly. But at that time, all the spells had been destroyed. How could Venerable Fiery Dragon bear to waste his own vital energy? He could only rely on the boat used by ordinary people. It was unknown whether Venerable Fiery Dragon was lucky or unlucky. Not long after he went out to sea, he met with a huge storm. His boat shook and completely disintegrated, leaving behind only a pile of wood. Venerable Fiery Dragon was glad that he did not bring the other boatmen along. At the same time, he cursed the shopkeeper who sold the boat. He was like Zhong Xiaohua, drifting on the sea for a few days before luckily finding this deserted island. Since then, he had spent the rest of his life on this deserted island. However, in the jade bamboo slip, Venerable Fiery Dragon mentioned that it was not that he could not return to the mainland. It was just that he had found fire elemental vital energy on this deserted island. It was able to prolong his life and thus, he had been staying on this deserted island. This sentence made Zhong Xiaohua extremely excited. If I can cultivate to old fire's level, even if I don't use a boat, I can still return to the mainland. That would be great. Otherwise, I would really lose the motivation to move forward. There was still a lot of content recorded in the jade bamboo slip. There was some common knowledge of the immortal Tao, basic spells, and so on. However, Zhong Xiaohua only skimmed through it and did not pay much attention to it. What he was concerned about was the content of the other 5 jade bamboo slips. Sure enough, he found information about other jade slips in a corner of the jade slip. These 5 jade slips actually recorded the spells that Venerable Fire Dragon comprehended on this deserted island. Doesn't that mean that only those in the foundation establishment stage can use them? Oh, it didn't say. Perhaps those in the chi refining stage can also use them. What I lack now are spells that can be used by those in the chi refining stage. There seems to be some records in these jade slips. Should I cultivate these basic spells first and cultivate the other jade slips after I have the foundation? Zhong Xiaohua was a little hesitant, but after thinking about it, she came to a decision. Let's take a look at what spells are in the other jade slips first. That way, I can make some arrangements. Wouldn't it be too boring if I kept cultivating a single spell? Without a doubt, Venerable Fiery Dragon had set up a restriction in the other 5 jade bamboo slips. If one wanted to read the incantations in the jade bamboo slips, he would have to cultivate the restriction first. Zhong Xiaohua searched through the records in the jade bamboo slips. Sure enough, she found the incantation of the basic restriction in one corner. Zhong Xiaohua was overjoyed. To be honest, she was very curious about the restriction. First, it was the snow that looked like real snow. Then, it was the forbidden area in the Misty School that could devour people. Then, it was the restriction in Xinji Town that looked like white fog. Now, there was a light screen at the entrance of the cave that could withstand her strength of 10,000 pounds. All of these made her very excited. She could not wait to set up such a magical thing immediately. However, although the incantation recorded in the jade bamboo slips was the basic restriction, it was much more complicated than the incantation of the Earth Escape technique. It was similar to the complicated incantation recorded in the back of the alchemy technique. However, Zhong Xiaohua could not practice the alchemy technique. She could only look at the simple theory. This restriction could be cultivated at any time. At that moment, Zhong Xiaohua did not delay any further. First, she went outside to look at the sky. After estimating the time, she began to comprehend the restriction incantation in the cave. For dozens of days, she comprehended the restriction incantation during the day and cultivated the Carefree Heart Sutra at night. After experiencing countless failures, Zhong Xiaohua finally comprehended the most basic restriction incantation. She successfully placed it on a jade bamboo slip that was about to lose its vitality. In her divine sense, the jade bamboo slip was immediately protected. Without the corresponding incantation, she could not enter it at all. However, when she excitedly tried to use the restriction incantation that she had just learned on the other 5 jade bamboo slips, she was very upset to find that only one of the small jade bamboo slips was unlocked. The rest of the jade slips did not move at all. When she used her divine sense to enter the jade slips, what appeared in her mind was restriction and formation. Zhong Xiaohua almost vomited blood and fell to the ground. Elder Hua, you can't play like this. This is a chain of traps. Only by learning this jade slip can she comprehend the other jade slips. You're really good. At this time, she heard catcher sounds of thunder outside. Zhong Xiaohua was overjoyed and said, Soon. It's time to go out and stretch my muscles. After she finished speaking, she put all the jade slips into her money pouch and walked out with her head held high. The next day, Zhong Xiaohua tempered his muscles and bones outside before returning to the cave in high spirits. He already had a plan in mind. Since Elder Hua made this arrangement, he naturally had his reasons. She was only a junior cultivator in the Tao of Immortality. There were many things that she had to cross the river by feeling the stones. Now that there was such an arrangement, she could only listen to it. Either way, it was cultivation. What to cultivate first and what to cultivate later was the same. Zhong Xiaohua first immersed his divine sense into the jade slip that had not been touched by anyone for 10,000 years and roughly looked through it. So it turns out that restrictions and formations are the same type of cultivation. If it's used in a small area, it's called a restriction. If it's used in a large area, it's called a formation. If it's used in a large area, it's called a restriction. Hihi, I understand now. Isn't this just a person having 2 names? When they're young, they can be called nicknames, such as Dumbo or Gosheng. When they grow up, they can be called Han Li or Zhong Xiaofan. That's right, why didn't mother give me a nickname? Nickname? Meng is his nickname, but I don't know what name Jing Xian Shatai gave him. Her thoughts began to break down. After a while, she was done with her daydreaming. Only then did she seriously look through the jade slip. This venerable fiery dragon was actually a master of formations. He had a unique way of cultivating formations. Furthermore, after he arrived at the deserted island, in order to withstand the changes in heaven and earth, he was even more obsessed with formations. He had a very thorough understanding of formations. This seemingly small jade slip recorded the essence of his 100 years of cultivation in formations. Zhong Xiaohua looked at it for a long time and knew that it was not something that could be comprehended in a short period of time. Although he despised the fire dragon immortal for not leaving everything to him, he had left a deep impression on the jade bamboo slip in his hand. When she saw the last part of the jade slip, Zhong Xiaohua's eyes lit up. There were a few big words written on it: Jade Blood Pill Refinement. What kind of cultivation technique was this? After taking a closer look, he realized, it turns out that the cultivation of this formation has a lot to do with one's divine sense. The stronger one's divine sense is, the faster one can set up the formation. Moreover, the foundation of the formation is the calculation of changes. The stronger one's divine sense is, the faster one can calculate and the easier it is to comprehend. The relationship between the divine sense and the cultivation of the formation was something that Fire Dragon Immortal had vaguely known long ago. He only understood it when he set up the formation and fought for a slim chance of survival against the heavens and earth. Unfortunately, His genuine chi was limited and he could not comprehend more profound formations. Oh, in order to strengthen his divine sense, he actually thought of a method of exchanging genuine chi for divine sense. Is it called refining elixir heart with jade blood? However, he actually did not master this cultivation technique. He only tried it in the beginning. When he felt that it was effective, he continued to calculate the later parts. As for whether the later parts of the cultivation technique were effective, even he himself did not know. Zhong Xiaohua touched her chin and muttered to herself. She knew the benefits of the divine sense. Not to mention being able to distinguish between magic treasures and jade slips, even being able to see in the dark and see things in other rooms was enough to move her. Furthermore, the area that her divine sense could cover was limited. If she could increase her divine sense and expand the area that it could cover, she knew that there would be endless benefits. But, after all, this is just a theory. What if it doesn't work? But on the other hand, Elder Hua is a big shot in the foundation establishment stage. Although his things are just theories, they are most likely correct. If not, why would he dare to record them down? Isn't he afraid that others will dig up his remains? Curse him behind his back. Following which, Zhong Xiaohua looked at the densely packed formations and restrictive spells in front of her. She felt a headache coming on. If she did not have the help of her divine sense, when would she be able to comprehend all of them? Actually, Zhong Xiaohua was also belittling herself. Her divine sense had appeared early. Moreover, for some reasons that she did not know, the growth of her divine sense was extremely fast. Otherwise, she would not have been able to grasp the basics of restrictive spells in just a few dozen days. Elder Hua's cultivation technique was an unimaginable method. It was to use all of the true qi in her body in exchange for a slight increase in her divine sense. This method was not allowed in Elder Hua's era, nor was there any true qi for him to use to increase his divine sense. Even during the heyday of the immortal Tao, there might not be anyone who was willing to cultivate it. All of the true qi had to be used up and replenished. The consumption of origin stones or pills was not a small number. Especially when one's cultivation was higher, the more they would need. However, these were only used in exchange for a slight increase in their divine sense. How could anyone be willing to cultivate this kind of cultivation technique that was not proportional to the output? However, on this deserted island, there just happened to be such a person who met the requirement. First of all, Zhong Xiaohua's cultivation was very low, only at the 5th layer of qi refining. She did not have much true qi in her body. Secondly, Zhong Xiaohua had the crouching ox rock, which contained a huge amount of spiritual qi of heaven and earth. A small origin stone from there was enough for her to cultivate for a very long time. She did not have to worry about not having enough true qi. It could be said that this jade blood pill refining technique was simply tailor-made for her. Chapter 300. In fact, there was another benefit in it. When he first came to the deserted island, Zhong Xiaohua understood the principle of destruction before creation. This blue blood pill refining technique exhausted all the true qi in his body every time. From another point of view, it was to train his true qi usage. Every time he exhausted all the true qi in his body, he would be able to enhance the regeneration of true qi, thus increasing his own cultivation. After considering the gains and losses of this cultivation method, Zhong Xiaohua decided that he had to successfully cultivate the jade blood pill refining heart. This was because he knew that now that all methods had been destroyed, there was no other shortcut for him to take. Only by cultivating his spiritual sense to an incomparably powerful level would he be able to master these formations and restrictions. Zhong Xiaohua once again immersed his divine sense into the jade slip, silently memorizing the thousands of words at the back of the jade slip. Only then did he withdraw his divine sense, put away the jade slip, and closed his eyes to comprehend. After a long time, his hands began to change, constantly forming different signs. With the changes of these strange signs, a layer of sweat gradually appeared on Zhong Xiaohua's head, and his brows were tightly knitted. Until finally, his face turned pale, and he clenched his teeth tightly. Only then did his expression relax, and the signs in his hands gradually stopped. Then he opened his eyes, sighed slightly, and took out a piece of vitality stone from his arms to replenish his true chi. After a while, his face returned to normal, and only then did he put the vitality stone back into his arms. This blue blood pill refining technique is really overbearing. It ignites the true chi and turns it into true fire. Using this true fire to refine one's divine sense, this feeling is really painful. The whole meridians are burning, and the mind is also burning like a flame, more painful than being pricked by needles. However, this effect is not for show. My divine sense is really strengthened a little, and it is worthy of its name. Moreover, after I replenish my true chi, it seems that my true chi can also be strengthened a little, really killing two birds with one stone. Unfortunately, practicing this technique is a headache. If I practice this technique all the time, I will either go crazy or go crazy from the pain. It's better to have a limit. Practicing 3 times in the morning, afternoon, and evening will be enough. Any more and the pain will be unbearable. What fun is there in practicing? Therefore, in the following days, Zhong Xiaohua only practiced the blue blood pill refining technique 3 times a day, and used the rest of the time to comprehend restrictions and formations. Of course, there was no delay in practicing the Carefree Heart Sutra at night. Even the Big Dipper magical fist, as usual, was a fist technique that he practiced every morning when he opened his eyes. When practicing, there was no sense of time. Although Zhong Xiaohua's cultivation was still shallow, 2 years had passed in the blink of an eye. In these 2 years, there were no ships that came by. However, Zhong Xiaohua achieved great results in his practice. He had broken through the 6th level of the Carefree Heart Sutra and was in the process of stabilizing it. He had also reached the 7th level of the Big Dipper magical fist, and the bones in his body were gradually turning transparent. He had also reached a bottleneck in comprehending restrictions and formations. He had already learned the basic restrictions and formations, and could easily set up some restrictions. As for formations, some simple and small formations, such as the 3 talents flag formation, were not worth mentioning in his eyes now. It was just that he did not have a suitable formation flag, so he could not set it up casually. Speaking of formation flags, simple and special formations could only be set up by some magical instruments. These instruments had to be refined to be effective, which was the way of refining. This was not explained in the small jade slip, and even in the chubby jade slip, it was not detailed. Presumably, Venerable Fire Dragon was not proficient in refining weapons, so there was no detailed record. Speaking of Zhong Xiaohua's cultivation results, the most outstanding was the cultivation of his spiritual sense. Although he only practiced 3 times a day, and each time he only increased his spiritual sense by a little, the accumulation over time was very impressive. Now, the range of his spiritual sense could almost cover the entire deserted island. He had just reached the peak of the early stage of chi refining, and had not entered the middle stage of chi refining. According to the records in the Carefree Heart Sutra, he had just cultivated his spiritual sense. One day, when it was close to noon, Zhong Xiaohua stopped comprehending the restriction and sat down cross-legged. His hands began to constantly change the incantation. Suddenly, the genuine chi in his meridians seemed to be ignited by something, and all of it turned into invisible genuine fire, rushing straight to his mind. In the Niwen Palace in his upper dantian, the invisible void was ignited by the endless genuine fire, and the entire void was about to be scorched. Every time the void dried up, a little bit of vitality would fly in from a mysterious place in the depths of his mind. Once these little bits of vitality entered his upper dantian, they moistened his Niwen Palace like raindrops, filling it with vitality. Today seemed to be different from the past. The endless genuine fire not only scorched his Niwen Palace, but also melted the void in his upper dantian. Everything in the void seemed to be distorted. A wisp of genuine fire flashed past, and Zhong Xiaohua felt a pain in his mind. Zhong Xiaohua also seemed to feel that today was different. The incantation in his hands changed faster, and the genuine fire became more intense. At a certain moment, the entire void in his upper dantian suddenly collapsed, and a few bits of vitality flew in. At the place where the void collapsed, a ball of liquid appeared and absorbed the vitality flying in. In an instant, a 7-colored light flashed and the entire void returned to its original state. All of the genuine fire disappeared, and only the ball of liquid was left, slowly rotating and agitating, just like the heart of an elixir. Zhong Xiaohua, who was in the cave, felt a pain in his head as if it was being split open by an axe when the ball of liquid appeared. If it was not for the torment of the past 2 years, he might have fainted at this moment. With this splitting pain, his mind also lit up. He felt that the whole world had changed completely, and the perception of his divine sense had expanded by 2 times. Following that, he felt an incomparable comfort, and the pain in his mind disappeared without a trace. A kind of incomparable joy in his upper dantian instantly spread throughout his entire body. He had to give Zhong Xiaohua a compliment for her good luck. Initially, there was no elixir heart in the upper dantian. One could only use the primordial fire ignited by the vital energy to refine the void. This process of refining was the most dangerous. Although it could strengthen one's divine sense, it was also extremely easy to refine one's Niwen Palace. Zhong Xiaohua was only a qi cultivator in the initial stage of qi refinement realm and not in the foundation establishment stage. He was far less confident in the primordial fire than Venerable Huolong. If it was not for the little bit of vitality in the primordial fire, his Niwen Palace would have been refined and he would have become an idiot. The most dangerous and impossible thing would be the appearance of the essence of cinnabar. That was something that came out of nothing and had long exceeded the capabilities of Venerable Fire Dragon. It was not something that he could have predicted. The cultivation method that he had created was only a theoretical cultivation method and was incomplete. It could also be said that it was a cultivation method that did not exist in the air. It was the cultivation method that Venerable Fire Dragon had imagined. Furthermore, it was clearly stated in the Jade Slip that he had not practiced it. He had only tried the beginning and felt that he could cultivate it successfully. However, it was precisely this feeling that misled Zhong Xiaohua. A perfected cultivator in the foundation building realm was a figure that far exceeded Zhong Xiaohua's understanding. In his understanding, the perfected cultivator was only in the 18th layer of the qi refining realm. Since the foundation building realm was superior to the qi refining realm, Zhong Xiaohua was only qualified to prostrate himself in worship. How could he possibly doubt him? Even with this feeling, Zhong Xiaohua only thought that this venerable fire dragon was an expert who did not practice it because he did not have enough qi of heaven and earth. Who would have thought that it was just a pie in the sky? However, he treated the path of despair as a smooth road, and walked step by step towards the cliff of the pie in the sky. At this critical moment, when he was guiding the lightning, the energy separated from the starlight became his life-saving straw. It nourished his Niwen Palace bit by bit, and at the same time, it condensed the source of the spiritual sense in his upper dantian. It also provided energy for the formation of the elixir refining skill. It allowed Zhong Xiaohua to cultivate the elixir refining skill in the most hopeless and impossible situation, and took the crucial step in the cultivation of the upper dantian. This was the cause and effect of everything. Who could explain it clearly? How would Zhong Xiaohua know of the many twists and turns and the cause and effect of this? He only felt that this foundation establishment stage cultivator's supernatural powers were incomparably strong. This venerable fiery dragon was really a genius and he was really lucky. After he used the primordial stones to replenish his vital qi, he then thought, my spiritual sense is now twice as strong as before. Furthermore, I feel refreshed and my mind is clearer than ever. There are many realizations in my heart. Could this be the sign of the initial success of the elixir refining skill? It's just that this skill has no continuation. Should I continue to practice like this in the future? Forget it, let's not think so much. This skill is similar to the Big Dipper magical fist. There's no need to practice it intentionally, and it's just a routine. I'll continue to practice like this in the future. In the afternoon, when Zhong Xiaohua was comprehending the restrictions and arrays, he was delighted to find that he could understand many of the areas that he did not understand in the past. Furthermore, the bottlenecks that he faced previously did not exist, and he seemed to be able to make further progress in the cultivation of arrays. After a few more days, Zhong Xiaohua was able to master the arrays with ease, and this gave him the time to consider the other few jade bamboo slips. At the same time, he was confident that he could unlock the restrictions on one of the jade bamboo slips. This time, he picked up the jade bamboo slip that looked thin and slender. First, he used his spiritual sense to circle around the jade bamboo slip, and then used his spiritual sense to enter different parts of the jade bamboo slip to test it out. Not long after, his lips curled into a smile. Following which, he confidently used his hands to form a few complicated seals and entered the jade bamboo slip. The jade bamboo slip first emitted a crimson glow, then turned white and disappeared. At this moment, when Zhong Xiaohua's spiritual sense entered, there was no longer any obstruction. However, when the words in the jade bamboo slip entered his mind, Zhong Xiaohua's face flashed with an unfathomable expression. Please accept, please tip, thank you. Chapter 301. The two words that appeared in her mind were, fire escape. Fire escape, as the name suggests, is an escape technique used in the fire. This earth escape technique is used to escape. Oh, no, it's used to travel. This earth escape technique is understandable. The world is full of mud. No matter where you go, your feet can't leave the ground. If you cultivate the earth escape technique, you can go anywhere. Even the water escape technique is understandable. Let's not talk about how vast the sea is now. If I have the water escape technique, I may have a chance to escape. Even on land, water is common and can be used frequently. But what's the use of fire escape? Don't tell me I have to escape from someone's kitchen. Sigh, this guy's mind is only thinking about escaping. Of course, in the Shuo Wen Jiezi, the most obvious meaning of escape was to run away. He had used this book to enlighten himself, so the deepest impression he had was of course to run away. Moreover, wasn't the purpose of him cultivating the earth escape to escape? Suppressing the doubts in her heart, Zhong Xiaohua continued to read. After reading for a long time, she suddenly understood. Martial arts emphasized Qigong, while Immortal Tao emphasized escape techniques. Whether it was levitation, earth escape, flight, fire escape, etc., they were all in the category of escape techniques. In this world, everything was in the 5 elements. Correspondingly, there were 5 types of escape techniques: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The most common ones were earth escape, wood escape, and water escape, because these 3 elements existed in large quantities around people. With these 3 types of escape techniques, they basically satisfied the needs of Immortal Tao. Moreover, with the development of Immortal Tao, there were smart people who were more skillful and invented the 5 elements escape technique. No matter what the situation was, they could use the 5 elements to escape. Also, whether it was Immortal Tao or martial arts, everyone had a temperament. Which one of them didn't care about face? In martial arts, Qigong, other than the basic requirements of internal energy, many also paid attention to the elegance of one's posture. Many people even ignored the essentials and focused on elegant and graceful movement techniques. It was the same for Immortal Tao. Looking at others flying on swords and floating in the air, who would think of the basic 5 elements escape technique? Only when they had just entered the sect would they slightly cultivate escape techniques of different attributes. In fact, most cultivators would only comprehend the escape techniques of the 5 elements and feel that they were done. Venerable Fiery Dragon was the same. He had only cultivated the 5 elements escape technique. This fire escape technique was something that he had obtained from a barren place. He did not take it seriously and did not even treat it as a technique. That was why he kept it by his side and did not place it in his cave abode for his descendants. However, Venerable Fiery Dragon was known as Fiery Dragon. Naturally, he had his own unique attainments in fire spells. The barren island that he was stranded on was not an ordinary island. It was a volcano that was no longer erupting. In the cave on the barren island, there was a cave that led directly to the underground magma. With such favorable conditions, Venerable Fiery Dragon was able to absorb elemental energy to prolong his life. When he was bored, he would study spells. The Jade Blood Pill refining technique was one of them. Venerable Fiery Dragon had also cultivated the fire escape technique by chance. At the start, he did not feel anything different. However, as his cultivation increased, his understanding of the fire elemental energy became more thorough. He was surprised to find out that the meaning of the fire escape technique could not be replaced by the 5 elements escape technique. Although the 5 elements escape technique could make use of the 5 elements escape technique to escape, escape was only one aspect of the escape technique. Although the 5 elements escape technique could replace the function of the escape technique, it had lost the essence of the escape technique. However, Venerable Fiery Dragon did not know what this essence was. When he was about to search for this essence, he regrettably found out that he had only cultivated the 5 elements escape technique. He did not even know the incantations for the other escape techniques. If it was during normal times, such cheap techniques could be found everywhere. Even if it was thrown in front of him, Venerable Fiery Dragon would not even bother to use his divine sense. Now, Venerable Fiery Dragon was regretting. It seemed like there was a earth escape technique that he had never seen before in one of the cubicles in the cave. Among the 5 elements, fire and earth were mutually reinforcing and restraining. If he cultivated both, there might be an unexpected effect. Venerable Fiery Dragon even thought of the problem of his cultivation level. It was a pity that there was a saying, "There is no medicine for regret in this world." This saying was also suitable for immortal cultivators. In the end, Venerable Fiery Dragon did not find any insights in this area. He did not even have any guesses. However, he had mastered the fire escape technique, which was extremely rare among immortal cultivators. That was because Zhong Xiaohua was bored and playing with the flying sword to catch seabirds. How long had she been playing with the flying sword? How could Venerable Fiery Dragon have so much time to waste? Hence, many times, it was not only interest that was the foundation of success. Loneliness and boredom were also the paint of success. Venerable Fiery Dragon cherished his own cultivation experience. This time, he had left the fire escape technique and his own cultivation experience in this jade letter. He hoped that if someone was fated to obtain it, they would be able to bring it to greater heights. The fire escape technique is extremely rare. That was a story from 10,000 years ago. Now, even the water escape technique, wood escape technique and gold escape technique are unheard of. I was kind enough to obtain this earth escape technique. Now that I think about it, it was a close call. If some time had passed, the incantations of the earth escape technique would have disappeared. Zhong Xiaohua was a little pleased with himself. He secretly gave himself a thumbs up in his heart for his character. However, I have been practicing the earth escape technique for so long. Why have I not discovered any secrets? If I'm not careful, I'll end up as a barbecue Zhong Xiaohua. I've roasted and eaten a lot of seabirds. Don't tell me I've become their retribution. Forget it. Since no one knows any escape techniques now, I'll just use the earth escape technique. I'll be able to escape with my life. Oh, as long as I can avoid being tracked by experts. Zhong Xiaohua kept the jade letter in her hand. She then tried to unlock the restrictions on the other jade letters. However, no matter how hard she tried, she could not unlock them. Sighing, Zhong Xiaohua kept the jade letter in her hand. She then tried to unlock the restrictions on the other jade letters. However, no matter how hard she tried, she could not unlock them. Sighing, Zhong Xiaohua placed the remaining jade letters into her money bag. Since Venerable Fiery Dragon had placed such a profound restriction, he probably did not want her to unlock it before she reached a certain level of cultivation. Zhong Xiaohua's eyes lit up. Could there be something in there that could help her build her foundation? In the next few days, Zhong Xiaohua continued to practice the green blood elixir heart. Ever since the elixir heart was born in her Niwen palace, she no longer felt a headache when she practiced the elixir heart. This made Zhong Xiaohua extremely happy. Although the headache was not an illness, it was still very painful. With the enhancement of her divine sense and the appearance of the elixir heart, she was able to control the flying sword better. The speed of the flying sword was almost twice as fast as before. Furthermore, she was able to control it more easily. Another 10 days passed. On this day, Zhong Xiaohua had finished her practice in the cave. She stood at the top of the mountain and looked at the sea. Looking at the seabirds flying above the sea, she could not help but have an idea. Speaking of the 5 elements escape technique, all of them were invisible to the eyes of others. The levitation technique, on the other hand, was to float in the air. When one practiced it to a high level, one would definitely be able to ride the wind. The lightness skill in martial arts must have been modified from riding the wind. If only Venerable Fire Dragon's Jade Bamboo Slip had the flying technique, that would be great. Thinking of this escape technique, Zhong Xiaohua naturally thought of the fire escape technique that she could practice. Her curiosity was piqued. Fire escape technique, although there is a danger of being burnt to a crisp, but according to Venerable Fire Dragon's words, if I could master the fire escape technique, it would be greatly beneficial to the earth escape technique. Since I have nothing to do, I might as well try it. As long as I am careful, there might not be any accidents. Once her curiosity was piqued, it was as though her heart had grown hair. She could not hold it in any longer. She took out the jade bamboo slip from her purse. Without even returning to the cave, she started to read it from the top of the mountain. The fire escape technique was obviously more complicated than the earth escape technique. Not to mention the 18 incantations that needed to be cultivated, just the incantations alone had more than 1,000 words. It was extremely difficult to read. Luckily, she had the experience of comprehending the earth escape technique. Furthermore, most of the contents in the jade bamboo slip were the cultivation experiences of Venerable Fire Dragon. It had given Zhong Xiaohua a clear path for her to comprehend. It was much easier than trying to comprehend the earth escape technique by herself. Zhong Xiaohua first memorized the incantations of more than 1,000 words in her heart. Following that, she started to comprehend the incantations according to Venerable Fire Dragon's experience. Not knowing how long had passed, Zhong Xiaohua's right hand suddenly moved. Between her fingers, complex incantations appeared one by one. However, the true energy ball of the earth escape technique did not appear. Zhong Xiaohua was not in a hurry. After her fingers stopped moving, she pondered for a moment. Her right hand formed another incantation and her body disappeared. She had actually returned to the entrance of the cave. Now that the protective shield at the entrance of the cave had been broken by Zhong Xiaohua directly entered the cave. She walked to a corner of the cave and rubbed her chin as she pondered. The fire escape technique is different from the earth escape technique. It requires a special environment. This might be the reason why the fire escape technique is so rare in this world. Who would stay in such a hot environment for no reason? The earth-lung fire below the cave is the best environment for cultivating the fire escape technique. If not for such an environment, Venerable Fire Dragon might not have been able to cultivate the fire escape technique to the great completion stage. However, he did mention clearly in the jade bamboo slip that although the earth-lung fire is beneficial for cultivation, it is after all overbearing and can easily harm the body. If the fire escape technique has not been cultivated to a certain level, it is best not to enter it. I think it is better for me to cultivate the basics of the fire escape technique in this cave first. When I have the ability to protect myself, it will not be too late for me to enter. After thinking, Zhong Xiaohua returned to the stone bed and sat cross-legged. She then closed her eyes and started cultivating. This cultivation was not a big deal. Another year had passed. Zhong Xiaohua naturally did not only cultivate the fire escape technique. She did not neglect the Worry-Free Heart Sutra, Big Dipper Magical Fist, Jade Blood Pill Refinement Technique and other techniques. Even the earth escape technique was frequently practiced when she was cultivating the fire escape technique. Furthermore, Zhong Xiaohua also realized that Venerable Fire Dragon's deduction was quite reasonable. His earth escape technique had actually improved slightly when he cultivated the fire escape technique. Chapter 302. The fire escape technique was indeed exquisite. Zhong Xiaohua only managed to master it after a year. She had barely reached the most basic level that Venerable Fire Dragon had mentioned. Zhong Xiaohua came to the corner of the cave again and cast a spell to remove the restriction. After the restriction disappeared, a dark hole appeared in front of Zhong Xiaohua. A desolate, distant and extremely hot fire elemental energy rushed towards her. Zhong Xiaohua could not help but take half a step back. After getting used to it, she jumped into the hole. The hole was not deep and she landed on the ground after a short while. Zhong Xiaohua immediately released her divine sense. However, it seemed that there was a restriction around her and her divine sense could not reach far. My divine sense can now cover the entire island. However, it can't go further than a few feet. Why did Elder Hua set up such a restriction? As she thought, Zhong Xiaohua took out the luminous pearl. Under the dim light and her divine sense, she slowly walked forward. This was a slope that led downwards. Although it was rugged, there were no forks and she was not afraid of getting lost. During this period, Zhong Xiaohua had thought of using the earth escape technique. However, the restriction around her had restricted her from using the earth escape technique. Without any other choice, Zhong Xiaohua could only stagger down slowly. After a long time, she still could not see the bottom. Zhong Xiaohua could not help but be shocked. Wasn't she already at the bottom of the sea? After cultivating for so long, Zhong Xiaohua's temperament had already become firm. She was no longer jumping around and could only walk down patiently. She did not want to retreat. After a long time, the air was scorching hot. Zhong Xiaohua's body that was immune to cold and heat was also getting impatient. At this moment, Zhong Xiaohua finally understood why Venerable Fire Dragon had to cultivate the fire escape technique to a certain level before coming down. Zhong Xiaohua formed a spell with her right hand and a stream of qi flowed down from top to bottom. A thin layer of light red qi covered her entire body. Wasn't this the most basic spell of the fire escape technique? If he couldn't even grasp this, he wouldn't even be able to see the fire of the earth lung. After walking for a while, she saw a red light flickering in front of her. Zhong Xiaohua was relieved that she had arrived at the destination. Sure enough, after turning a corner, she saw a sea of fire twice the size of the small lake on the deserted island. Well, it would be more appropriate to call it the Fire Lake. The entire lake was dark red in color and was bubbling. Above the lake, there was a raging fire that was several feet tall. The fire was roaring and seemed to be burning for a long time. Zhong Xiaohua knew in her heart that this was the place where Venerable Fire Dragon cultivated his fire escape technique. Looking around, they were surrounded by rocks that were illuminated by the dark red light. Looking up, there was a space that was dozens of feet high. Above and all around were rocks, and under the illumination of the fire, it actually emitted a resplendent light. Zhong Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and his heart thumped. He released his divine sense with a whoosh. Sure enough, the resplendent lights were actually night luminescent pearls. No wonder old Fire Dragon's cave was decorated with luminous pearl. So this is where the treasure came from. There are so many luminous pearls. Ayo, I'm rich. But, how do I collect this luminous pearl? Even if I use a small sword to pry it open, I won't be able to catch it. It's extremely easy for me to fall into this sea of fire. I better hurry up and cultivate my fire escape technique. For the sake of this luminous pearl, I will definitely learn it. After thinking about it, Zhong Xiaohua did not want to waste any more time. She kept the luminous pearl in her hands and made a gesture with her right hand. Pointing towards the sea of fire, a wisp of flame flew over and wrapped around the light film on her body. Zhong Xiaohua's gesture changed again and her body slowly melted like a candle. Following which, she merged with the wisp of flame. The flame immediately returned to the sea of fire and Zhong Xiaohua disappeared. But suddenly, a burst of black smoke rose and Zhong Xiaohua was shot out from another part of the flame. Half of her long hair was already burnt. Zhong Xiaohua helplessly touched her hair and consoled herself, since my hair is already long, I will have to use a small sword to cut it off. Let's just treat it as cutting it off now. Then, she sat cross-legged and closed her eyes to think about her gains and losses. A moment later, a smile crept onto his lips. He formed another hand seal, and his figure disappeared into the flames once more. Just like this, Zhong Xiaohua came out and went back in. She cultivated till night time before returning to the cave. As she pondered over her cultivation experience, she cultivated the Worry-Free Heart Sutra. The next morning, after she finished her routine cultivation, she went underground again to cultivate the fire escape technique. It was still the same old saying, cultivation knows no time. After another half a year, Zhong Xiaohua had basically learned the fire escape technique according to Venerable Fire Dragon's instructions. However, Zhong Xiaohua did not discover the secret that Venerable Fire Dragon had guessed. On this day, Zhong Xiaohua was sure that she had completed her cultivation of the fire escape technique and could appear anywhere in the flames. Only then did she release her flying sword and began her plan to make a fortune. She skillfully used her small sword to pry up a luminous pearl. When the luminous pearl fell, she estimated its landing point and used the fire escape technique to catch it. As she was not familiar with the first two luminous pearls, she did not catch them properly and fell into the sea of flames. This made Zhong Xiaohua's heart ache for a long time. She did not make any mistakes after that. That fire escape technique, under such intensive training, was much faster than the previous few days. Before the luminous pearl was completely pried off, Zhong Xiaohua's fire escape technique had reached a new level. She could appear at any precise location and her speed had also increased by a lot. Of course, if she was a little slower, the luminous pearl would have fallen into the sea of flames. That was a huge sum of silver. Zhong Xiaohua continued to pry up the luminous pearl and was very excited as she scuttled around in the flames. She was not careful and fell straight into the sea of flames. Zhong Xiaohua was shocked and immediately used the levitation technique to float towards the shore. When she landed on the ground, she heaved a sigh of relief. The flames in the sea of flames were formed by the red lava in the sea. How would she dare to provoke it? However, he immediately thought that the red lava was definitely not water. It should be rocks that were smelted at high temperatures. When he thought of the lava, he suddenly realized that although the lava could flow, it was still rocks. Since it was rocks, then the earth escape technique should be able to be used. The reason why the lava was in the form of lava was because there was a high temperature fire in it. Since there are rocks and fire in the lava, then if I use both the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique at the same time, will I be able to enter the lava? Is this the secret that Venerable Fiery Dragon was talking about? He did not cultivate the earth escape technique and only cultivated the 5 elements escape technique and the fire escape technique. I think he would not be able to enter the lava, which is why his jade letter did not mention the lava. But, do I have to take the risk? Sigh, forget it. Let's get the night luminescent pearls first. Zhong Xiaohua calmed herself down and carefully kept the rest of the luminous pearl into her money bag. Then, she happily returned to the cave. On the second day, she returned to the underground. Zhong Xiaohua had already made up her mind. Actually, no matter if it was an immortal cultivator or a martial cultivator, they would not give up on the opportunity to increase their strength. They would also be willing to take the risk to increase their strength. Zhong Xiaohua was also the same. Although the lava was dangerous, it was obvious that the lava was a mixture of rocks and fire. Theoretically, as long as she combined the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, she should be able to pass through the terrifying lava. Of course, although the lava was also a substance of the 5 elements, it was not something that could be subdued by the 5 elements escape technique, which was a jack of all trades. Furthermore, as her cultivation deepened, Zhong Xiaohua gradually understood that the path of immortal cultivator was a path of challenge. Challenging oneself, challenging the heavens and earth. The combination of the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique was an extension of the 2 techniques. More importantly, it was a challenge to oneself. It was a challenge to one's courage, cultivation, and state. If she did not accept the challenge, it would leave a knot in her heart and it would be unfavorable for her future cultivation. Hence, after thinking for a long time, she finally came back. Sitting cross-legged in front of the sea of fire, Zhong Xiaohua pondered for a long time. What I need to do now is to combine the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique. But how should I combine them? Should I use both my left and right hands at the same time? My left hand has never practiced any techniques, so I don't think I can succeed in a short time. How about I use the earth escape technique first and escape into the earth below me, then immediately use the fire escape technique to enter the lava. Or I can use the fire escape technique to enter the flames first, then use the earth escape technique to enter the lava. There must be lava in the earth below me. I don't want to accidentally fall into it. Let's use the fire escape technique first, then enter the lava from the fire. After making up her mind, Zhong Xiaohua gritted her teeth, made a hand seal, and flashed into the flames. She stayed in the flames for a while, then made another hand seal for the earth escape technique. Her figure immediately disappeared from the flames, and when she reappeared, she was in the dark red lava. In the lava, Zhong Xiaohua looked worriedly at the black and red light membranes around her body. When she was sure that there was no problem, she tried to use the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique respectively. She found that these two techniques could be used in the lava. Zhong Xiaohua was overjoyed. She used the earth escape technique to swim in the lava. The 2 layers of light membranes excluded the dark red and extremely hot lava, so she was not hurt at all. However, in this lava, Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense was suppressed. She could not use her divine sense like she could in the flames or the earth. She could only extend her divine sense a few feet away. But even so, these few feet were extremely useful. She had already found traces of the luminous pearl on the stone wall beside the lava. It was even easier to pick the luminous pearl in the earth escape technique. As long as her divine sense locked onto it, she could use the earth escape technique and reach out her hand to pick it up. It was even more convenient than using a small sword. Therefore, Zhong Xiaohua forgot about the danger and greedily picked the luminous pearl, all the way into the depths of the lava. Chapter 303. Wasn't there a saying, extreme joy begets sorrow? When Zhong Xiaohua saw so many luminous pearls in the magma, his heart was overjoyed and he almost did a somersault in the magma. Moreover, this luminous pearl was easy to pick, it was as easy as lifting a finger. Zhong Xiaohua had plenty of strength. Hence, he followed the stone wall all the way down. The more he picked, the easier it was. Not knowing how long he had been going down, suddenly, Zhong Xiaohua's released divine sense encountered a strange yet familiar thing, divine sense. Another kind of divine sense. This divine sense was like a solidified rock, transmitting an incomparably majestic solemnity. Once Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense came into contact with it, a kind of throbbing came from the bottom of his heart. Although his divine sense hadn't seen anything, but a kind of feeling like an ant under a huge mountain immediately arose from his heart. Zhong Xiaohua's body trembled, the essential qi light shield on his body also rippled, almost bursting. Zhong Xiaohua didn't care about the luminous pearl that slipped from his hand, he immediately suppressed the throbbing in his heart and immediately withdrew his divine sense. His right hand hurriedly changed a spell, repairing the light shield before it collapsed. Because he withdrew his divine sense, the throbbing from the bottom of his heart seemed to have disappeared. Zhong Xiaohua didn't dare to go down again. That kind of feeling just now was really an indescribable feeling. It seems like a kind of fear and surrender from the bottom of my heart, a kind of instinctive bowing of head, or the feeling of seeing an absolutely powerful natural enemy. Yes, it must be. It's like when I was young, I was bitten by a snake in the field and then saw a snake again. But this feeling is 10,000 times stronger than before. Don't tell me there's a giant snake that eats people in here. Zhong Xiaohua's heart was somewhat hesitant, not hesitating whether to go back to the shore, but hesitating whether to release his divine sense again to see what exactly was outside. After pondering for a while, Zhong Xiaohua clenched her teeth and cast a spell. First, she flew upwards. Then, in a split second, she used all the essence of elixir in her Niwen palace and released her divine sense to scan the area below. In an instant, boundless throbbing arose from the bottom of his heart, and even his path of retreat was changed. It was also in this instant that Zhong Xiaohua's consciousness forcibly passed through a large expanse of magma. He vaguely saw that it was a huge eye, an upright eye that was tightly shut. Zhong Xiaohua couldn't believe it. If the eye was so huge, how big would the body be? Moreover, this monster is obviously in a deep slumber and doesn't have any obvious consciousness. However, his unconscious and unintentional divine sense is so huge that it feels as heavy as a mountain. But that wasn't the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter was that as soon as I came into contact with this divine sense, I felt a sense of worship, helplessness, and fear. What exactly is this thing? Who cares? Who cares? It seems like Venerable Fiery Dragon's Jade Bamboo Slip didn't mention this monster. I think he probably didn't meet it before. Since it didn't wake up 10,000 years ago, it definitely wouldn't wake up now. Venerable Fiery Dragon cultivated in the sea of magma for such a long time without disturbing it. I don't think I'll wake it up. My character isn't that bad. Sigh, Venerable Fiery Dragon didn't go into the magma and naturally wouldn't disturb it. In the future, I won't go down too. Ayo, why did I go down so deep? Why didn't I reach the end after such a long time? Zhong Xiaohua didn't know that when he took the risk to observe, he had already deviated from his original path. However, he wasn't too anxious at this moment. After all, he was thinking of getting as far away from the monster as possible. As for where he was, as long as he was still on this island, no matter how deep he went, he still had the earth escape technique. Sure enough, when he really popped his head out of the sea of fire, the luminous pearls on his head clearly told him that he was lost. Zhong Xiaohua looked at the luminous pearl and grinned. His white teeth also revealed a trace of radiance. He didn't panic. First, he sat down cross-legged and slightly recovered his vital energy. After calming his heart, he released his divine sense. Indeed, he was already far away from Venerable Fiery Dragon's cave. His divine sense wasn't restricted and he easily found the cave above his head. Then, Zhong Xiaohua rubbed his hands and laughed as he stood up from the ground. He walked to the edge of the magma and at this moment, his eyes were attracted by something above the magma. What is that? It's black and it's actually floating in the air between the magma and the flames. Zhong Xiaohua first walked closer and took a closer look. It turned out to be a long sword, floating quietly in the air. If it was the previous Zhong Xiaohua, although he knew that this long sword was floating strangely, he might just raise his hand and grab it. However, ever since he saw Venerable Fiery Dragon's restriction, he felt a little respectful towards such things that went against common sense. Hence, he carefully released his divine sense and checked again. Indeed, the long sword was covered by a small restriction and it didn't block out his divine sense. Zhong Xiaohua looked at the long sword and felt a little strange. How is this a long sword? It's more like a thick stick. It just has the appearance of a crude sword. This is strange. Why can't my divine sense enter it? If it was an ordinary item, there would be a restriction that can't be entered. However, this long sword doesn't have any restriction and can't be entered. What is this strange thing? However, today, Zhong Xiaohua had seen many things that he had never seen before. He was already numb to it. This was just an inanimate object that couldn't be entered with his divine sense. He would just take a look at it later. After studying this restriction, Zhong Xiaohua was a little enlightened. This seems to be a simple array. It uses the fire elemental energy in the magma to refine this long sword. It doesn't have any restriction on being taken away. It must have been refined by someone in the past. However, I don't know the reason why it was left like this and no longer cared about. The long sword was very close to the shore and Zhong Xiaohua could reach it with his hand. However, he still carefully released his divine sense and observed it carefully. He used his right hand to conjure a spell and was ready to burrow into the ground if something went wrong. At the same time, he used his left hand to reach for the long sword. However, when his left hand grasped the end of the long sword, he didn't discover any changes in the small array. It must be purely used to refine the long sword. When the long sword entered his hand, it wasn't as hot as he imagined. Instead, there was an icy cold feeling in his hand. Zhong Xiaohua was overjoyed. He knew that this thing that had been refined in the hot magma for so long was actually icy cold. It must be a treasure that he didn't know about. However, when he tried to take it back, he couldn't lift it the first time. Oh, it's actually so heavy. Therefore, Zhong Xiaohua used another 50% of his strength to take out the long sword-like thing from the tempering array. Ever since Zhong Xiaohua started practicing the fist of the Big Dipper and started to hone his bones, the strength of his two arms became stronger and stronger. Now that he had cultivated to the 7th level of the fist of the Big Dipper, The strength of a single arm was close to 5,005 kilograms. Now, he actually had to use a few thousand kilograms of strength to lift this unremarkable long sword. How could he not be stunned? Holding this sword that weighed a few thousand kilograms in front of his eyes, he used the weak firelight in the space to carefully examine it once again. This was something similar to a sword embryo. It already had the appearance of a long sword, but it was more like a thick and long root. If it wasn't for the sharp protrusion at the front and the lack of length, it might as well be called a rod. The cold feeling in his hand was still there, but this coldness didn't seep into his skin. It was just a kind of internal coolness that made him feel comfortable holding it. It couldn't be seen from the surface. Zhong Xiaohua could only wave it a few times. Luckily, although this unremarkable long sword was very heavy, Zhong Xiaohua could still wield it. Looking at the stone wall beside him, Zhong Xiaohua used his strength to pierce the long sword into the stone wall. In his mind, it must be like piercing into tofu, incomparably nimble. Of course, weren't the peerless divine swords in the books all so skillfully and without workmanship? Unfortunately, the reality in front of his eyes greatly exceeded his expectations. The stone wall was pierced, but it was only a few inches. Some soil debris fell down. This was simply inferior to a normal longsword. Where was the elegance of a peerless divine sword? Zhong Xiaohua casually waved it a few times, clumsily making half a nondescript sword flower, and smiled bitterly. This is obviously a long rod. Why did it have to look like a long sword? If it was a little longer, I might as well go to the Dailin temple and change the Dharma sword technique to the Dharma rod technique. At least it's better than this sword that can't even pierce through stone. Although this long sword didn't have any external appearance, and also didn't have any inner qualities, it was impossible for Zhong Xiaohua to spit out the item that was in his hands. Zhong Xiaohua thought for a while, and finally dismissed the idea of putting it into the space of the money pouch. This cumbersome thing weighed more than 5,000 kilograms, who knew if the money pouch could withstand it? The space of the money pouch was a secret that made Zhong Xiaohua smile when he thought of it. How could he carelessly test it? If for some reason it was spoiled, ayo, with so many good things, how was he going to take it? He casually stabbed the long sword into the ground, but no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't go in. Zhong Xiaohua also didn't want to use brute force, so he could only throw it on the ground. Then, he released the small sword, made a gesture with his hands, and disappeared in the flames. He then excitedly pried up the luminous pearl on the rock wall. When the luminous pearl on the rock wall was all in the money pouch, and became Zhong Xiaohua's personal property, he then reluctantly picked up the long sword on the ground. In fact, Zhong Xiaohua knew in his heart that there must be a space like this underneath this deserted island, where he could pick up the luminous pearl. If it was before today, Zhong Xiaohua would have been burning with anxiety, and quickly released his divine sense to search for it. But just now, he had seen the power of the lava monster. That was a kind of instinctive surrender from the bottom of his heart, a kind of worship from a lower level to a higher level, a kind of fear that was engraved in his heart. How could he still have the courage to do something that would alarm the monster? Even if there was a chance, he wouldn't do it. Picking up the long sword, Zhong Xiaohua's eyes looked at the dark red lava. He slightly narrowed his eyes, and stared at it for a long time. The throbbing that made his hair stand on end, although it stopped him from doing anything, at the same time, it also aroused a trace of unyielding in the bottom of his heart. A thought spontaneously rose from the bottom of his heart: maybe, we will meet again. Chapter 304. Zhong Xiaohua returned to the mountaintop of the deserted island with the long sword. Breathing in the salty sea breeze, Zhong Xiaohua sighed with emotion. No wonder there were so few people who practiced the escape art. They spent their days digging holes in the ground. How could it compare to flying? He had only stayed below the island for less than a day. Even breathing in the sea breeze felt comfortable, not to mention constantly moving around underground. Sitting down with his legs crossed, Zhong Xiaohua checked his meridians. He realized that using the long sword to perform the earth escape technique required a few times more vital energy than using the earth escape technique alone. This was a huge price to pay. Forget it, forget it. I shall just keep it. Maybe when I get old, I can use it as a crutch. Zhong Xiaohua tried his best to convince himself not to throw it into the sea. Although the trip to the lava was not dangerous, it also proved that Venerable Fire Dragon was right about the special effects of the escape technique. Hence, in the next few days, other than practicing the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, he would also perform the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique on the surface of the lava. Of course, this was only limited to the surface of the lava. He had no interest in disturbing the rest of the monsters. Even though he knew that there were many luminous pearls in the lava, he was not interested in them. Silver was not omnipotent. Without silver, one would not be able to do anything. However, for the sake of one's life, silver could be given up. After he had mastered the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, Zhong Xiaohua focused on the cultivation of the prohibition technique and the formation. He still had 3 mysterious jade letters to unlock. Furthermore, he had already mastered the Worry-Free Heart Sutra, the Fist of the North Star, the Elixir Heart of Emerald Blood, the Sword Art, the Fire Escape Technique and the Earth Escape Technique to a certain extent. There would not be much improvement in the short term. Only the Prohibition Technique and the Formation seemed to be more useful as he mastered the Elixir Heart. He felt that there were many things that he needed to cultivate. Just like that, he chased the seabirds with the small sword when he was free. When he was busy, he used the Lightning Escape Technique to train his muscles and bones. When he was bored, he used the Earth Escape Technique to make fire. When he was in the mood, he used the Elixir Concoction Technique. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. At this time, it has grown wings. We can't catch up to it no matter how hard we try. That's homesickness. It's a poison that corrodes one's bones. There's no antidote in the world that can cure it. Zhong Xiaohua stood leisurely on the top of the mountain, looking at the rising sun and muttering to herself. It had been 4 years since she arrived on this deserted island. In the beginning, Zhong Xiaohua had carved marks in the cave to record the days. Later, she cultivated diligently and gradually forgot. However, with the passing of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, she could still tell that this was already the 5th spring and autumn. During these 4 years, Zhong Xiaohua himself did not notice how tall he had grown or how much his appearance had changed. He only knew that after daily practice and every rainy night, his Carefree Heart Sutra had finally reached the edge of the 6th level of the refining Qi realm. However, it was this edge that he could not break through. His progress in the Fist of the North Star also slowed down. Now he had reached the 8th level. Every time he practiced it twice, the flow would refine his bones. However, he could only refine his bones 9 times a day, not more than once. As for the elixir refining heart with green blood, the heart-like water droplet in his upper dantian was still the same. It seemed that there was no change, but the range of his divine sense had expanded, which meant that it was improving every moment. As for the elixir refining art, since his divine sense improved, his understanding of the elixir refining art had also improved. However, there were no herbs on this deserted island for him to try, but his control of the elixir furnace and the flame had reached an extremely fine level. Since he could use the earth escaping art and the fire escaping art at the same time, Zhong Xiaohua had further developed his own understanding. Through unremitting efforts, he could initially combine the incantations of the 2 escaping arts to form a black and red chi shield, or the fire escaping art. This kind of escaping art could be used in both fire and earth at the same time. Moreover, the speed of the escaping art was also much faster. However, the consumption of chi was also considerable. As for the flying sword art, with the increase of his divine sense and chi, the speed and range of the flying sword had increased a lot, but it was still an incomplete set of swordsmanship. What Zhong Xiaohua was most proud of was the Tao of restriction and formation. Normally, one would have to spend a lot of effort and time under the guidance of a master before they could achieve something. However, Zhong Xiaohua had achieved something in just 2 years. Now, he could set up simple restriction. Although he did not have any formation flag as a medium, he could roughly set up some small formation. Of course, it was the kind that could only be seen but not used. Furthermore, Zhong Xiaohua could already use the restriction incantation to set up some restriction incantation into the jade slip. In order to practice this, Zhong Xiaohua specially took out some jade slips that had already lost their vitality. Once these restriction incantations were set up, the jade slip would emit a fluctuation of vitality. However, this fluctuation was the fluctuation of the formation and not the original fluctuation of the jade slip. Of course, in these 4 years, Zhong Xiaohua had read the first jade slip that Fire Dragon Immortal had left behind. There were some spells that he could also use. For example, there was the fireball technique. He could easily release an egg-sized fireball in a cave or in a sea of fire. However, on this mountaintop, he could only release a small flame that would be extinguished immediately. In short, Zhong Xiaohua had achieved something that ordinary people would not be able to achieve in 10 years on this deserted island. This was not only because he was alone on this deserted island and could only focus on practicing, but also because he had cultivated an incredible elixir core which strengthened his divine sense as much as possible. It was also because he practiced day and night. Moreover, a night of practice or a rainy night of practice was equivalent to a few days of practice. Just based on this reason, 4 years of practice was equivalent to 8 years of practice for others. Moreover, the most important thing was that he missed his parents, his elder brother, his sister-in-law, and his second brother. He missed the people in the Misty School and the Huanxi Manor. He even thought of Brother Ma's smelly feet. The faint face that he often thought of in his dreams was even more unforgettable. In order to avoid these thoughts, he cultivated in a selfless manner. It was also this selfless manner that made him feel the bone-chilling longing while he was cultivating. Every time the sun rose, before he cultivated the Big Dipper magical fist, he would look at the horizon from afar and miss his family members who were far away. He would then criticize Fire Dragon Immortal in his heart. Why didn't you leave any flying escape technique in the jade slip? Even if you don't want to leave this deserted island, you still have to think about your descendants. He then put in more effort to cultivate the restriction and flying escape technique, hoping that one day he would be able to unlock a flying escape technique. After looking at the sun and missing his family members, Zhong Xiaohua was about to start cultivating the Big Dipper magical fist. Suddenly, he saw a red object floating towards the deserted island from afar. One side of the deserted island was facing the undercurrent. Every moment, there would be many things passing by the side of the island. However, most of them were aquatic plants, fishes, and floating wooden beams. It was the first time he saw such an eye-catching object. Zhong Xiaohua frowned and released his divine sense. He discovered that it was a person lying on a wooden beam. Zhong Xiaohua was overjoyed. He formed a seal and his body immediately disappeared. Not long later, he appeared on the beach by the sea. He stood with his hands behind his back and waited quietly for the person to float over. It was not that he did not want to save the person earlier. However, he cultivated the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, not the water escape technique. Furthermore, the levitation technique could not allow him to stay in the air for a long time. How could he enter the water? Moreover, he also knew that the undercurrent was coming towards him. There was no need for him to do anything unnecessary. Sure enough, after a while, the undercurrent washed the person to the shore. Just as he was about to be swept away, Zhong Xiaohua reached out and fished him out of the water. This was a burly man about 30 years old. He was tall and had dark skin. His face was not too clear because it was somewhat deformed from being soaked in the water. Needless to say, this person had already lost his vitality. Zhong Xiaohua did not use his fingers to test his breath. With his divine sense, he already knew that he had no heartbeat and breath. However, Zhong Xiaohua still carefully turned him over. He lifted his red cloak and opened the clothes on his back. On his back, there was a big, black palm print deeply imprinted into his flesh. Zhong Xiaohua touched his chin and thought for a while. Then, he turned him over again. She saw that his right hand was tightly grasping the front of his clothes, as if he was afraid that something would fall out from his chest. After thinking for a while, Zhong Xiaohua reached into the man's chest and took out a money bag and a small metal box. She opened the money bag and looked at the things inside. Then, she put it back. Then, she carefully looked at the metal box in her hand. This was a very simple-looking metal box. There were some patterns engraved on it. There was a lot of rust on the edges of the metal box. It must be very old. There was also a very small iron lock on the metal box, tightly locking the box. There was no key in the money bag just now. Zhong Xiaohua had to lean over and search the man's chest again. Still, she did not find anything. He actually did not bring the key with him. This must be a valuable thing. Perhaps it is for someone else. What should I look at? Or not? Of course I have to look. If I don't look, how will I know who it is for? How can I help him to bring it there? In an instant, Zhong Xiaohua gave a very reasonable reason. So, he used his divine sense to scan the metal box. Knowing that there was no mechanism in this metal box, he reached out his right hand and took out the small sword. With a flash of the sword, the small lock fell down cleanly. When he opened the metal box, it was indeed very empty. There was only a rag-like thing at the bottom of the box. Zhong Xiaohua was surprised. I thought there would be some treasure. It is just a rag. Thinking, he reached into the box and took out the thing. He closed his eyes and meditated, quietly comprehending the way of array formations. Suddenly, he felt something in his heart. His divine sense spread out like a big net and looked at the sea around the deserted island. Suddenly, Zhong Xiaohua opened his eyes in surprise and stopped the incantation in his hand. Without caring about his image, he floated up from the stone bed and did a few somersaults in the air. Ha 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 ha, he laughed loudly and landed on the ground. Then, with a twist of his body, he disappeared on the spot. Not long after, he appeared on the top of the mountain. He shaded his eyes with his hand and looked into the distance. He saw that in the direction of his gaze, a huge boat was slowly moving towards the deserted island. For a moment, Zhong Xiaohua's heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. Nervous, surprised, timid. In short, Zhong Xiaohua was extremely excited at this moment. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He disappeared from the spot and returned to the cave. He looked around and walked to a corner of the cave. He jumped into the cave and hurried to the side of the sea of fire to make sure that he didn't forget anything. Then he returned and sealed the cave with a restrictive spell. Then he took the long sword on the stone table and the luminous pearl from the stone wall. The whole cave fell into darkness. Zhong Xiaohua went out of the cave and activated the restrictive spell at the entrance of the cave with a spell. Then he used the earth escape to the earliest cave. That cave was dark and small. It didn't look like someone lived in it. Zhong Xiaohua frowned and went to the field of Solomon's essence. He casually plucked a few stalks of Solomon's essence. Without removing the leaves and soil, he returned to the cave and threw them aside. Then, after thinking for a while, he threw the long sword in two. Then he returned to the top of the mountain. The speed of that huge boat was actually very fast. In a short while, it was clearly visible. Zhong Xiaohua used his divine sense to scan it again. He couldn't help but frown. This huge boat was one size smaller than the one in the Southern Sea Serpent Palace. There were no flags on the mast and there weren't as many people below the deck as there were in the Southern Sea Serpent Palace. However, there were many martial arts experts in the cabin. This was obviously not an ordinary boat. It was very likely that it was looking for the burly man who drifted over a few days ago. However, he didn't know if it was for revenge or for him. Zhong Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and rubbed his chin. He was thinking. If it was for him, it would be easy. He would bury him and they would be deeply grateful. If it was for revenge, it would be for the burly man's belongings. He didn't know if they would find out that he had opened it rashly. He still had to think of a way to deal with it. Forget it. What's there to think about? I'll just pretend that I don't know. These people won't believe me no matter what I say. Why should I think too much? After making up his mind, Zhong Xiaohua didn't think too much about it. He just wanted to take the boat back. What did their grudges have to do with him? After a long while, the boat was nearing. The people in the cabin had already walked out and started pointing at the deserted island. When they were about to see him, Zhong Xiaohua raised his hand and waved. Sure enough, in his divine sense, the group of people were panicking. Many people came out of the cabin and even came up from below the deck. They looked at Zhong Xiaohua on the top of the mountain and pointed at him, saying something. Then, the boat stopped there. Zhong Xiaohua was secretly happy. Suddenly, he felt a trace of worry. What was going on with this boat? If it didn't approach the deserted island, what should he do? However, he was really worried about his gains and losses. Chapter 306. When this ordinary-looking youth ran in front of them, the two looked at each other. One of them was a skinny, white-faced man in his mid-20s. He cupped his hands and said, "Excuse me, brother, can you understand what we are saying?" Bang! Zhong Xiaohua, who was full of hope, almost fell to the ground. "What are you talking about? Why can't I understand what you are saying?" But when Zhong Xiaohua opened his mouth to speak, he really did understand what this person meant. I can understand." Zhong Xiaohua's speech was actually a bit jerky. That was because he had stayed on this deserted island for more than 4 years. There was no one around him, so it was impossible for him to communicate with others. How could he be so fluent? Even if he was looking at jade slips and talking to himself, he was just mumbling. When had he ever talked to others so loudly? Hearing Zhong Xiaohua's words, the pale-faced man turned his head to look at the burly yellow-faced man beside him. After exchanging glances, the pale-faced man smiled and said, "Look, this little brother has also stayed on this deserted island for many days. Did you encounter some kind of storm and end up here? Is this little brother the only one on this deserted island?" Zhong Xiaohua bared his teeth and said, "Yes, I, a few years ago, went out to sea, encountered a big storm. The ship sank. I also fainted. When I woke up, I drifted to this deserted island." After saying a few words, Zhong Xiaohua's speech gradually became fluent. The yellow-faced man beside him looked very honest. He asked in a low, muffled voice, "Is this little brother the only one on this deserted island? What is this little brother's name? Where are you from?" Zhong Xiaohua said, "I am from Jingyu City. Big brother, you can call me Ren Xiaoyao. I have followed my family out to sea since I was young to make a living. Last time, unfortunately, the storm was really bad. I guess I am the only one who escaped. I am the only one who ended up on this deserted island. May I know who these two big brothers are?" The white-faced man said, "Little brother is really lucky. I am Chai Feng of Shinrong Gang's Luo River Hall. This is my senior brother, Bai Yonggui." Zhong Xiaohua smiled and cupped her hands. "Greetings to the two heroes of Jianghu." Bai Yonggui glanced at him and said with a smile, "Brother Ren also has good martial arts. Why did you go out to sea when you were young?" Zhong Xiaohua said, "Master Bai, you flatter me. I'm just trying to make a living. That's why I learned a little bit of Qigong. I've let you two laugh at me. What kind of internal energy have you practiced?" "Reckless bull's strength." "Oh, so that's the case. Little brother, since you can use Qigong, your Neigong cultivation is also not bad. Where did you learn it from? What sect do you have?" "Sect?" Zhong Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "I won't hide it from you two big brothers. I used all my belongings to exchange for a book of Reckless Bull's strength from someone who claimed to be from Misty School. That person casually gave me some pointers and I have a little bit of internal energy. I can barely use Qigong. I just wanted to escape and didn't want to learn anything. You see, I accidentally wandered here. Even if I have Qigong, what can I do?" "Misty School?" The two men's expressions changed greatly when they heard this. They said at the same time, "Misty School? What did that person look like? When did you see him?" Zhong Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She frowned and said, "Let me think. It should be when I was 7 or 8 years old. It was 10 years ago." When the two men heard this, their expressions relaxed and they looked at each other. Zhong Xiaohua continued, "It was a man in ragged clothes. His face was sallow, as if he hadn't eaten for more than 10 days. He made me treat him to meals for several days in vain." The two men were even more relaxed. The pale-faced Chai Feng smiled and said, "Brother Ren, you were probably fooled. That Misty School is a big sect in the martial arts world. 10 years ago, it was at its peak. How could there be such a sloppy person? If you met him in the past 2 years, it might be true. 10 years ago, it definitely wasn't. Why would it be possible in the past 2 years?" Zhong Xiaohua was a little surprised and was about to ask. The yellow-faced Bai Yonggui interrupted, "Brother Ren, how many years have you been here?" "It should be 4 years. Hero Bai, I've been muddle-headed. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter should be 4 years. Ah, so long." The two men were surprised and their eyes flashed with a strange light. Then, Chai Feng probed, "Brother Ren, can we take a look at the place where you live?" Zhong Xiaohua thought, "Hey, you're here. I expected it and was waiting for you." On the surface, he looked uneasy and said, "Heroes, I live in a very simple and crude place. There's no need to look." Chai Feng smiled and said, "Brother Ren, don't worry. We just admire you for staying on this deserted island for so long. We just want to see how you live." Zhong Xiaohua nodded and said, "Then, please follow me." After he finished speaking, he led the way using his qinggong. Looking at the somewhat clumsy Zhong Xiaohua in front, the two men smiled and followed behind. Zhong Xiaohua released his divine sense and saw the two men's expressions clearly. His heart was even more nervous. Sure enough, after the two men saw the simple and uninhabited cave, they asked, "It seems that you live here alone. However, how do you fill your stomach?" Zhong Xiaohua pointed to the sealwort by the lake and said, "There's a field of sweet potatoes over there. They're very delicious. I often went to the countryside to play in Jingyu City and saw others planting them. That's how I saved my life." Since they knew it was sweet potatoes, the two men were too lazy to look. After all, they had only heard of it and knew that it was a wild animal that the villagers often ate. Then, Chai Feng looked at Bai Yonggui and asked softly, "Brother Ren, I want to ask you something. If you know, please tell me truthfully. If this matter can be fulfilled by you, we will definitely thank you. Of course, if you don't know, it's okay. We will also bring you back to the colorful world of the land." "Really? Hero Chai, please say it. I will tell you everything I know." At this time, Bai Yonggui's voice was trembling as he asked, "During this period, did you see anyone or a corpse drifting to the deserted island?" After that, Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng stared nervously at Zhong Xiaohua, looking forward to his answer. "Yes." Zhong Xiaohua answered firmly. The two men were overjoyed. Chai Feng asked, "Brother Ren, where is that person? What does he look like?" "What does he look like? He was wearing a red cloak. I don't remember what he looked like. His face was soaked in water, so I didn't look carefully." "Ah. Then where is his body? Where is it?" "He's already dead. Why would I keep him? He drifted away with the current." "What?" the two men shouted at the same time. "You let him go." Bai Yonggui took a step forward, grabbed Zhong Xiaohua's arm and said, "When did this happen? Why didn't you fish him out?" Zhong Xiaohua pretended to be in pain and said, "Hero Bai, can you be a little less forceful?" Chai Feng hurried forward and pulled Bai Yonggui away. He advised with some regret, "Senior Bai, Brother Ren didn't know the importance of this person. It's just a corpse. You don't have to blame him." Bai Yonggui said angrily, but. After a while, he couldn't say anything. At this time, Zhong Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said, "Is this person very important?" Chai Feng smiled bitterly and said, "Of course he's important. Otherwise, us brothers and the brothers on the ship behind us wouldn't have come to this deserted island." Zhong Xiaohua smiled and said, "That's good. Hero Chai, since this person is so important to you, I'm relieved. In fact, if I didn't say anything, you would have brought me on the ship. Of course, you might not have let me on the ship. This little one is alone and doesn't have the ability to let you two heroes bring me." When these words came out, the two were surprised and happy. They were happy because the situation seemed to have taken a turn for the better. The youth in front of them seemed to know the whereabouts of the red-clothed man. They were surprised because this youth was so sophisticated and didn't trust people as easily as other young men. Of course, this surprise immediately dispelled the last of their doubts. Of course, which of the youths who lived on the sea for years wasn't a sly person? How could they be so easily fooled by their promise? Ren Xiaoyaro, being so careful, explained his identity. He was a youth from Jingyu City who lived on the sea. After making up his mind, Chai Feng smiled and said, "Brother Ren, it seems that you still don't trust us. We brothers will swear an oath. If we don't bring Brother Ren to land, we will die under Brother Ren's sword. What do you think?" Zhong Xiaohua looked at Bai Yonggui. The seemingly honest and considerate Bai Yonggui immediately nodded his head. Zhong Xiaohua pondered for a moment and laughed inwardly. It seems that these two still have a trick up their sleeves. They obviously know that I know Qinggong, but who knows if I know swordsmanship or not. They are very crafty and slippery. However, he nodded his head and sincerely said, "Since the two great heroes have said so, this little one also knows that the great heroes of Jianghu are all true to their words. They certainly won't be willing to go back on their words. This little one naturally believes you." Then, he pointed to a place not far away and said, "That red-clothed man was buried by this little one there." When Bai Yonggui heard this, he was overjoyed and said, "That's great. Brother Ren, this is one of this little one's martial brothers. You have preserved his corpse. Our Luo River Hall is endlessly grateful." Zhong Xiaohua modestly said, "In the eyes of great hero Bai, it was just a small matter. Let's go, I will take you there." Finished speaking, he picked up his long sword from the ground and brought the two people to the place where the red-clothed man was buried. Zhong Xiaohua pointed to the slightly raised ground and said with a smile, "Great hero Bai, do you think I should dig up your martial brother's corpse?" Bai Yonggui looked at the stick in Zhong Xiaohua's hand and cupped his hands. "Then I will have to trouble you, little brother." "You are welcome, great hero Bai." Finished speaking, Zhong Xiaohua stuck out his butt and began to work hard at digging a hole. He was the one who buried the corpse, so he was naturally aware of it. His skillful farming methods once again dispelled the two people's doubts. That's right, which Jianghu person had such a level of digging? Chapter 307. When the burly man's body was dug out, even though it had been buried for a few days and there was a stench, the two's eyes lit up, just like Zhong Xiaohua's expression when she saw the luminous pearl. Bai Yonggui glanced at Chai Feng and said to Zhong Xiaohua with a smile, "Brother Ren, the two of us will tidy up the remains of my senior brother. You can go to the cave and tidy it up. When you're done, we'll return to the ship and send you back to land." Zhong Xiaohua smiled and said, "Okay, hero Bai. This little one has the same idea. I was in a hurry just now and there are things in the cave that I haven't tidied up." After she finished speaking, she cupped her hands and walked towards the cave with her long sword in hand. Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng were able to endure it. When Zhong Xiaohua's figure disappeared from their sight, they quickly turned the burly man over and covered their noses. They found the money pouch and iron box from his chest and searched the burly man's body for a long time. After making sure that they didn't miss anything, they checked the money pouch. When they saw the iron box without the iron lock, they were stunned and nervous. It wasn't until they opened the iron box and saw the sheepskin scroll inside that they were wild with joy. Bai Yonggui took it and looked at it carefully. He said to Chai Feng, "Junior brother Chai, it seems that this is the real thing. However, why is this box open? I heard from Tan Chi that this iron box and key were held by Tan Wen and Tan Wu respectively. Where did the iron lock go?" Chai Feng smiled and said, "Maybe Tan Chi heard wrongly. He's just a servant. How could he know so much? Anyway, this thing is already in our hands and we brothers have done a meritorious deed. We just have to wait for our reward when we return. It's better to leave this troublesome matter to gang leader." Bai Yonggui also grinned and said, "That's how it should be." Then, he frowned and said, "Junior brother, how do you think we should deal with this Ren Xiaoyaro? This Tan Wen was fished out from the sea by him. Maybe he has already seen this thing. That's right, maybe he was the one who removed the iron lock." Chai Feng laughed involuntarily and said, Didn't you see that he looks like a brat running around the sea? This kind of narrow-mindedness can't be faked. Moreover, he had stayed on this island for 4 years. How would he know about the matters of the Jianghu? Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to understand the meaning of the parchment. Besides, he helped us find this sheepskin scroll. We owe him a debt of gratitude. We can't be ungrateful. But what if he leaks the news? If this news were to spread to the Jianghu, it would set off a huge wave. Well, let's bring him to land first. Our brothers are all on the ship. Let's hear their opinions. Well, I'm still not at ease. What if the sect leader blames me? Wouldn't you blame us for being incompetent? Senior brother Bai, I think it's best if you keep these things first. Take them with you. I think that kid will be back soon. When Bai Yonggui heard this, he hurriedly put the iron box and the money pouch into his bosom. Sure enough, at this moment, Zhong Xiaohua's figure came down from the hillside. Chai Feng raised his voice and laughed. Brother Ren, are you done packing? I'm done packing. Are we leaving now? Let's go now. After that, the two of them lifted their legs and were about to leave. Zhong Xiaohua curiously asked, 2 heroes? Don't you want the remains of your senior brother? Both of them looked embarrassed. Chai Feng hesitated and said, well, we want to go to the ship to find something so that we can carry his body to the ship. Zhong Xiaohua smiled and said, it's not that troublesome. Let me do it. I think the two of you have never done such a thing before. After that, he walked to the front of the big man and wrapped the big man's body in his own cloak. He lifted his hand and carried it on his shoulder. Then he picked up his sword from the ground and said, 2 heroes, let's go. After that, he lifted his leg and walked in front, leading the way to the seaside. The two of them looked at each other in dismay and hurriedly caught up from behind. After walking for a while, Bai Yonggui gently pulled Chai Feng and made a chopping hand gesture. Chai Feng shook his head. Bai Yonggui gritted his teeth and made a strange hand gesture to Chai Feng. Chai Feng looked at it and frowned. He sighed softly and seemed to have compromised. Seeing this, Bai Yonggui gently pulled out his sword from his waist. Chai Feng also helplessly took out his sword. Bai Yonggui gestured and called out to them. From behind Zhong Xiaohua, he straightened his body and stabbed at Zhong Xiaohua's back. Chai Feng's sword also helplessly stabbed at Zhong Xiaohua's shoulder. Seeing that the sword was about to stab, Zhong Xiaohua's body tilted and the big man's body happened to block Bai Yonggui's sword. Bai Yonggui was shocked and quickly withdrew his sword. Seeing this, Chai Feng also took the opportunity to withdraw his sword. They heard Zhong Xiaohua say without turning her head, 2 heroes, be careful. There are a lot of stones on the ground here. Don't be like me. You must pay attention to your feet and don't sprain your ankle. Saying this, she didn't relax her feet and quickly walked to the top of the mountain. Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng were bewildered and stopped in place. They didn't know what to do as they watched Zhong Xiaohua's figure gradually pull away. Then, Bai Yonggui clenched his teeth and narrowed his eyes. He was about to rush forward when Chai Feng saw this and quickly pulled him back. He whispered, Senior brother Bai, it's too late. That brat has already reached the top of the mountain. If we launch a sneak attack from behind, we'll be ridiculed by the other brothers. Bai Yonggui was shocked. When he looked up, he saw that the youth had already reached the top of the mountain. They could see him from the boat. If he launched a sneak attack, he would be able to claim credit in front of the gang leader. However, he would lose all face. If he and Chai Feng had just left the youth here, no one would know. Chai Feng had also attacked from behind, so he naturally wouldn't reveal it. However, if he were to do this now, it would definitely not work. Alas, that stone on the road just now was really a coincidence. Bai Yonggui fiercely glared at Zhong Xiaohua's back and quickly followed Chai Feng to catch up. How could he know that the unremarkable country youth in front of him had already seen everything through his divine sense and was secretly sneering in his heart? The 3 of them arrived at the seaside. The small boat was still waiting for them. On the large boat in the distance, everyone saw a youth carrying a red object on his shoulder. It was very strange and they all pointed at him. Zhong Xiaohua stood beside the small boat and carefully sized it up. She secretly muttered to herself. Although this is a small boat used to ferry people, it's not much smaller than the riverboat used by the Southern Sea Dragon Palace in Jingyu City. It must be specially used at sea. It should be able to withstand the weight of a long sword. Presumably, she exerted force with her feet and jumped up from the ground onto the small boat. As Zhong Xiaohua's figure landed, the entire small boat sank into the water with a whoosh. The two people on the boat were shocked. They were sailors on the boat and were used to seeing things on the water. A strange thought emerged in their hearts. What the hell? This youth is so thin, but why is he so heavy? It feels like even an elephant isn't this heavy. Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng were also stunned when they saw this. However, they didn't have the same intuition as the two sailors. They only thought that it was caused by Zhong Xiaohua carrying the large man's corpse. At the same time, they thought, this youth's qinggong is really ordinary. Moreover, he looks quite thin, but there's quite a lot of meat on his body. Thinking about this, the two also floated onto the boat. The small boat didn't move at all. When they returned to the boat, the two sailors were exhausted. How could they not be tired when there were only two people on this small boat that weighed 5,000 to 6,000 kilograms? As a result, the time taken to return was actually several times longer than before. When they finally reached the boat, the two sailors were so tired that they almost foamed at the mouth. Chai Feng saw the side of the boat and asked, "Brother Ren, can you go up by yourself? If you can't, ask them to lower the rope." Zhong Xiaohua thought to herself, lower the rope? That's even more impossible. I don't know how many people are needed to get this long sword up. She said, I'll try, Hero Chai. If I can't get up, it won't be too late to use the rope. After that, she exerted force with her feet. The small boat swayed again and sank a lot. Then, Zhong Xiaohua's figure shot straight towards the boat like a bullet. Seeing Zhong Xiaohua move forward, the two didn't hesitate and quickly followed. Zhong Xiaohua stood steadily on the boat with the big man's corpse on her back. Even the boat was slightly tilted to one side. At this time, there were about a dozen people surrounding them. When Zhong Xiaohua saw this, she was about to speak. Bai Yonggui jumped up and said, Junior brother Li, come here. Quickly help to carry senior brother's corpse back to the cabin. Senior brother? Corpse? A dark-skinned fatty who was half a head shorter than Zhong Xiaohua scratched his head and said. Then, he saw Bai Yonggui's eyes and immediately understood. He said, okay, I understand. Senior brother Bai, I'll immediately carry senior brother's corpse back to the cabin. After that, he stepped forward and frowned as he took the corpse on Zhong Xiaohua's shoulder. At this time, Chai Feng also walked forward and said, Brother Ren, thank you for carrying senior brother's remains up here. You must be tired. Go wash up in the cabin, eat something, and rest. We brothers will hold a banquet to express our gratitude to you in the evening. Zhong Xiaohua cupped her hands and said, Thank you, Hero Chai. Chai Feng called over a sailor and gave him some instructions. The sailor led Zhong Xiaohua to a room on the second floor of the cabin and left. Not long after, he came back with a bathtub filled with hot water and many snacks. After the sailor closed the door and left, Zhong Xiaohua laughed loudly. She carefully placed the long sword at her feet, threw off her clothes, and jumped into the bathtub to wash. Zhong Xiaohua was also a person who was about to reach the 6th layer of qi refining. Her body was filled with true qi and there was no dust on her body. Even the impurities in her body had been purified long ago. She didn't need to take a bath. However, when she saw something that she hadn't used in 4 years, she couldn't help but feel happy and wanted to enjoy it. Chapter 308. After Zhong Xiaohua finished his bath and tidied up his appearance, he sat comfortably on the chair and tasted the desserts that had been delivered. It wasn't a big deal, but he almost bit off his tongue. Ever since Zhong Xiaohua's cultivation entered the 5th layer of qi refining, he no longer needed to eat food. However, he still occasionally ate some sealwort to refresh his mouth. Seeing the desserts that he hadn't eaten in 4 years, His appetite was naturally aroused and he finished them all. After he finished eating the desserts, he withdrew his divine sense and sneered in his heart. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate, no longer paying attention to the others. In the cabin downstairs, a dozen or so Shinrong faction disciples were arguing incessantly. No one was able to convince anyone. The majority, led by Yonggui, unanimously believed that they should kill this youth of unknown origin here and then throw him into the sea. On the other hand, the minority, led by Chai Feng, believed that even though there was a possibility that this youth would leak information, they had promised to bring him back to land after all. Furthermore, they had also made a poison oath. It was best to escort him back to the faction and let the sect leader make a decision. After arguing for a long time, Chai Feng gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. He was originally part of the minority and wouldn't argue with his fellow disciples over this youth. After all, he was a member of the sect and would have to live in the sect in the future. It was best to close one eye to things that he couldn't control. Ari, how much can conscience be worth in this day and age? Seeing Chai Feng compromise, Yonggui smiled. This time, they were able to obtain the sheepskin scroll from the deserted island. However, as for the punishment of the unfamiliar youth on the deserted island, if his opinion was adopted, it would naturally overshadow Chai Feng's. When they returned to the sect, he would naturally be the first to receive a reward based on merit. How could he not fight for such an opportunity? But what about the innocent youth's life? How could she be worthy of his attention? What followed was naturally to discuss how to make their move. Of course, this discussion was only to add some fun to the boring journey. Or perhaps they wanted to find a reason for their conscience. In short, it didn't take long for them to agree to make their move after dinner. Although Zhong Xiaohua was cultivating and did not release his divine sense, how could he put these people in his eyes at this time? If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to board this ship, he would have already made his move when Yonggui ambushed him on the deserted island. Why would he wait until now? Since they had already waited until now, why would they be afraid of a little trick? When it was already late, a sailor came up to invite Zhong Xiaohua downstairs for dinner. Zhong Xiaohua originally did not want to go downstairs, but with her spiritual awareness, she sensed that everyone downstairs was in high spirits, as if they wanted to watch a good show. She could not help but think, they have just boarded the ship, and there is still a long way to go. If I don't teach them a lesson first, there may not be peace in the future. Alas, the tree wants to be quiet, but the wind will not stop. By the time Zhong Xiaohua followed the sailors down to the cabin, all the wine had already been prepared. Although it was far from being as luxurious as the Southern Sea Flood Dragon Palace, it was still a rare sight on this vast sea. Just like before, there was no place for Zhong Xiaohua at the head of the table. There was only a place left for him at the end of the table. Moreover, when he came down, the banquet had already begun. How could there be an empty seat? Zhong Xiaohua stood in front of the door and smiled as she looked at everyone in the hall. She cupped her hands at them and sat down without any trace of politeness. The people of the Shinrong faction did not show any abnormalities because of her appearance. Instead, as everyone drank and ate, their eyes revealed a hint of playfulness. Only Chai Feng, who sat at the head of the table, had an apologetic expression. He looked at Zhong Xiaohua a few times with unease. Although Zhong Xiaohua's head was lowered, she had already released her divine sense. Everyone in the hall could see clearly. Moreover, this banquet had clearly stated that they wanted to thank her. However, they did not wait for her to come down before starting the banquet. They also did not introduce her to everyone. Clearly, they treated her like a dead person. Everyone's etiquette had been stripped away, leaving behind only naked ugliness. She sighed again. Alas! For some reason, Zhong Xiaohua sighed a lot more today. Was it because she was getting older? Zhong Xiaohua secretly scratched her head. Of course, after freshening up and taking a closer look, she realized that she was no longer the childish youth from 4 years ago. If she walked in front of Pulsatilla Wang now, he might not be able to recognize her. That's right. I wonder what the result of the battle at sea was. Did the navy of Jingyu City win, or did the Southern Sea Serpent Palace win? However, what does this have to do with me? I am Ren Xiaoyao, who has already been buried in the belly of a fish. Ayo, just now on the deserted island, I still called myself Ren Xiaoyaro. I won't leave any evidence behind, right? It doesn't matter. It's been so long. Pulsatilla Wang must have already forgotten about me. He will only be at home hugging his southern sea girl. Hee. Besides, do I still have to be afraid of him now? Although Zhong Xiaohua was not too interested in the food and wine in front of him, he had not eaten for many years after all. Thus, he moved his chopsticks slightly and tasted every dish. The taste is not bad. This group of people actually didn't put poison in the food. After eating 2 more mouthfuls, Zhong Xiaohua felt bored. However, she knew that there was still a good show to be performed. She could not leave early. Sure enough, Bai Yonggui's eyes never left Zhong Xiaohua. From the moment Zhong Xiaohua entered the cabin to her interest in eating, he saw everything. Seeing that she stopped eating, he thought that she had not eaten hot food for a long time and was not used to it. When he was about to leave, he hurriedly said, "Fellow brothers, it was all thanks to Brother Ren that we were able to find the corpse of our senior brother in this vast sea. Everyone, let's toast to this little brother." Seeing everyone raise their cups, Zhong Xiaohua also smiled, raised her cup, and took a sip. Everyone drank it in one gulp and saw that Zhong Xiaohua was ignoring them. Bai Yonggui said again, "Brother Ren, you fished out my senior brother's corpse from the sea and buried him. I admire you very much. I'll take this opportunity to toast you on behalf of my senior brother." After speaking, he drank it in one gulp. Zhong Xiaohua nodded and still put the cup to her mouth. Bai Yonggui poured the wine and was about to speak again when Chai Feng spoke first. "That, Brother Ren, I'll also toast to you. The sea is vast, and there are still many days. If there is anything that I did not take care of you well, please forgive me." After speaking, he raised his cup and drank it. "He's not a bad man." Zhong Xiaohua thought for a moment and raised his glass to taste it again. Bai Yonggui looked at Chai Feng with dissatisfaction and said to Zhong Xiaohua with a smile, "Brother Ren, if you are full, I have something to tell you." After hearing this, Zhong Xiaohua stood up and said with a smile, "Hero Bai and Hero Chai have already toasted me a few times. I'll also return the favor and toast to Hero Bai." After speaking, she floated up and exerted force on her feet. Her body shot out like an arrow, and in the blink of an eye, she was in front of Bai Yonggui. Before Bai Yonggui could react, she raised her cup and said, "Come, Hero Bai, please drink this cup." In an instant, everyone was shocked. Bai Yonggui was not the only one who was stunned. Looking at the wine cup that suddenly appeared in front of him and Zhong Xiaohua's smiling face, he had an indescribable feeling in his heart. The rest of the people were even more surprised. A few of them lost their composure and suddenly stood up, wanting to draw their swords from their waists. Chai Feng was surprised but reacted quickly. He immediately coughed and said, "That, Senior Brother Bai, cough cough, Senior Brother Bai." Bai Yonggui seemed to have woken up from a dream. He hurriedly stood up, and even the wine cup on the table almost spilled. Zhong Xiaohua's hand was as fast as lightning. She immediately held the wine cup and handed it to Bai Yonggui. She smiled and said, "Hero Bai, you don't have to be so polite. You can sit down." Bai Yonggui said awkwardly, There's no need. Since Brother Ren came to propose a toast, of course I have to stand up." Zhong Xiaohua smiled and said, "Hero Bai, you are too polite. Please." After speaking, she raised her cup to her lips and returned to her seat with a smile. Bai Yonggui looked at the wine cup in his hand. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and drank it. After that, the atmosphere in the cabin immediately became oppressive. The rest of the people looked at Bai Yonggui and Zhong Xiaohua with uncertain expressions. They didn't know what to do next. Zhong Xiaohua looked and asked, "Hero Bai, didn't you have something to tell me just now? May I ask what it is?" Bai Yonggui seemed to be infected. He also coughed twice and said, "It's nothing big. It's just that we still have a long time on land. If there's anything, just tell us. Little brother, you have lived alone on a deserted island for so many years. If there's anything you're not used to, just tell us. Please tell us." Zhong Xiaohua cupped her hands and thanked him. Then I thank Hero Bai. I'm used to living alone on a deserted island. I can't adapt to a crowded place for a while. In the future, I won't come down to eat. Please take care of me. After speaking, she cupped her hands at everyone. At this time, everyone no longer had the playful expression from before. They all stood up and said that they didn't dare. Then, Zhong Xiaohua smiled and said, I just got out of trouble. My body is really weak. I have to leave first. Please enjoy your meal. After speaking, she cupped her hands and left the cabin. In fact, when he came out, he wanted to say, Hero Bai, the road on the deserted island is uneven. I hope the road on the sea can be smooth. But after thinking about it, he felt that his lightness skill must have been enough to subdue this guy. So, he didn't intend to draw legs on a snake. Back in the cabin, Zhong Xiaohua didn't release his divine sense as before. He believed that if people weren't too stupid, they wouldn't have any ideas about him. Of course, if there was really someone who didn't know what to do, he wouldn't be lenient. Zhong Xiaohua sat cross-legged and cultivated for a moment. Then, he took out 2 primordial stones from his arms, one in each hand. Then, his right hand made a gesture and kept changing. He drew out the primordial chi from the primordial stones and hit it on the 4 walls of the cabin. He didn't stop until his forehead was sweating. This was the result of Zhong Xiaohua's cultivation of restriction and formation. He could barely set up some simple restriction to protect himself. After setting up the restriction, Zhong Xiaohua held the primordial stones in his hand and closed his eyes to cultivate. You can eat the meat, but you can give this little brother some soup to drink. This merit should be decided by senior brother. This little brother will just wave the flag and shout from the side to support you. Bai Yonggui said unhappily, junior martial brother Yu's words are wrong. The sect leader has said that no matter if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it can catch mice, it's a good cat. It doesn't matter if you're a senior martial brother or a junior martial brother, as long as you can contribute to the sect, you're a good disciple. I'm only bringing you out. The reward will still depend on your performance. I won't block your path for myself. I think I'll leave this matter to you. Junior martial brother Yu hurriedly said, senior martial brother Bai is too modest. I've always followed senior martial brother's lead. This time, I won't steal senior martial brother's glory. Right, if senior martial brother isn't willing to lower yourself to do it, I think junior martial brother Li should do it. He's already seen through this youth's strength and must have a card up his sleeve. When junior martial brother Li heard this, he was greatly angered and thought to himself, this bastard is really hateful. I was just casually flattering senior martial brother Bai. You're the one who stood up to take credit, but when you see that the wind is blowing in the wrong direction, you push it to me. Who doesn't know that the youth's qinggong is powerful and that he can easily get close to us? If he has a long sword in his hand, his swings and thrusts will catch us off guard. Even senior martial brother Bai, with his high martial arts, fell for it, let alone us. If he really gets angry and wants to fight to the death, he'll definitely be able to drag a few of us down with him. This is still a situation where we're surrounded. If it's one-on-one, wouldn't the situation be even worse? Who would be stupid to be a bird that sticks its head out like this? Then, he immediately stood up and said, Senior martial brother Yu, I'm only making a logical judgment. Senior martial brother doesn't need to take it seriously. Just treat it as a fart. Moreover, senior martial brother Yu is my senior martial brother and senior martial brother Bai is my senior martial brother. If senior martial brother Yu isn't willing to steal senior martial brother Bai's credit, how could I dare to steal senior martial brother Yu's credit? In my opinion, it's better for senior martial brother Yu to go. How could junior martial brother Yu go? He had no choice but to brace himself and recommend a few more people. As for those who were recommended, they were angry that they were recommended and all of them were pushed back. In short, no one was willing to face Zhong Xiaohua's ghost-like qinggong again. Bai Yonggui watched for a long time and secretly frowned. He coughed and said, junior martial brothers, to serve the faction leader, even if it's a mountain of swords and a sea of flames, you can't even frown. How can you shirk your responsibilities like this? Hearing this, all the junior martial brothers were overjoyed and said in unison, if that's the case, then senior martial brother Bai must personally take action. Bai Yonggui's face reddened and said, this is an important matter. It's better for us to discuss it again. We must have a foolproof plan before we can take action. What do you think, brothers? Everyone laughed and said, that's how it should be. Chai Feng also watched for a long time before he opened his mouth and said, Senior Martial Brother Bai, Junior Martial Brothers, although this matter is important, we still have a long journey ahead of us. There's no need to rush. It's already late, so everyone should rest early and discuss it again tomorrow. What do you think? Hearing this, everyone stood up and cupped their hands before returning to their cabins. After the sailors finished cleaning up, they served fragrant tea. The two of them took a sip before Chai Feng said, Senior Martial Brother Bai, it seems that we have a hot potato in our hands. Bai Yonggui felt the same and nodded, Junior Martial Brother, did you also think of the words Ren Xiaoyaro said on the deserted island? Yes, Senior Martial Brother. Now that I think about it, there was a hidden meaning in those words. If it's really as we guessed, then this youngster's martial arts are far from what we can compare to. Perhaps only us junior martial brothers can take action together. Junior martial brother, are you not insisting on sending him to land and letting him leave safely? Chai Feng said, a gentleman's word cannot be taken back. Junior martial brother is still willing to abide by the maxim and send him to land. However, junior martial brother isn't an inflexible person. If this youngster doesn't have the strength to truss up a chicken, then he must have no connection with Jianghu. If he returns to land, then he'll just mix in with the common people and probably won't leak any information about us. However, this youngster's martial arts are so strong that he might have some connection with some sect or sect. If he returns, then he might leak the information about the sheepskin scroll. I know that sect leader doesn't want the people of Jianghu to know that it was our Shinrong sect that gained the benefits. Therefore, I feel that this youngster shouldn't be left alone. Bai Yonggui smiled. Then junior martial brother also agrees to silence him? Then let's properly discuss how we should act. Chai Feng shook his head and said, Senior martial brother Bai, it's not necessary to silence him to seal the information. This youngster only got involved by chance and doesn't know the details. Why don't we invite him to our sect and let him stay for a period of time? It won't be too late to let him out after the storm dies down. What do you think? Bai Yonggui shook his head and said, only the dead can keep secrets. This is what sect leader often teaches us. Junior martial brother, how could you forget? Moreover, this guy's martial arts are so strong that he might be a spy from another sect. If we bring him back and there's a problem, wouldn't we be inviting a wolf into the house? I think junior martial brother's idea is too conservative. Chai Feng sneered. Then Senior Martial Brother Bai, what do you think we should do? This youngster's Qinggong is superb. Although I don't know how good his other martial arts are, just today's move alone shocked everyone present. The other junior martial brothers don't dare to face him alone. I think that even if we surround him, no one will dare to be the first to attack him. Bai Yonggui was also helpless. He didn't want to be the first to attack, let alone the others. At this time, he suddenly said, Junior martial brother, why don't we secretly make a move while this guy is asleep? What do you think? Secretly make a move? Chai Feng snorted and said, didn't you see how careful he was? He didn't even eat a few mouthfuls of the banquet. It was as if he was afraid of putting something in the dishes. He has lived on the sea for many years and has seen many things. Believe it or not, he definitely won't sleep peacefully tonight. Who knows? He might even be waiting for us to come. Thinking about Zhong Xiaohua's performance just now, Bai Yonggui couldn't help but agree with Chai Feng's opinion. For the time being, he dismissed the idea of a night attack. Regarding Zhong Xiaohua, this youngster who he didn't know the depth of his martial arts, he didn't want to be in a hurry to shed all pretense of cordiality. Along the way, there was still plenty of time and opportunities. It was better to first stabilize this guy. Maybe an opportunity would appear and he would be able to dispose of him without shedding a drop of blood. Thus, the two chatted for a while before returning to their cabins to rest. Chapter 3:10. For the next few days, the elite disciples of the Shinrong sect continued to stare at each other, unable to come up with any good ideas. After all, they had never practiced a siege formation. If they were to attack like a swarm of bees, no one could guarantee that they would be able to completely dodge the youth's outstanding Qinggong. Even if they had been taught to give up for the sake of everyone in the sect, who would be willing to give up their lives in front of a real situation? As for Zhong Xiaohua, it was just as Chai Feng had expected. He was really an experienced sea runner. Ever since he met everyone for the first time, he did not show his face again. All of his daily food needs were sent to the cabin by the sailors. Bai Yonggui had invited him a few times, wanting to find out more about him, but he had been rejected with the excuse that he had just left the deserted island and was not feeling well. Even when the sailors delivered food, they only ate a little bit of staple food and drank a little bit of water. The rest of the meat and fish were not touched at all. This also destroyed the thoughts of some people who wanted to poison the food. In fact, Zhong Xiaohua had already abstained from eating, so it did not matter if he ate or not. However, if he really did not eat or drink in front of the people of the Shinrong sect for a few days, then he might really be seen as a monster. They might even take advantage of his hunger and thirst to kill him. Wouldn't that disrupt his plan of hiding his strength? Zhong Xiaohua also really did not want to fall out with the people of the Shinrong sect before they returned to land. The more Zhong Xiaohua acted like a hedgehog that no one could bite, the more Chai Feng felt that his judgment was correct. He was just an innocent sea runner. On the other hand, Bai Yonggui was even more anxious. The supplies on the ship were limited, so he could not delay the ship from docking. Once the ship docked, he would have no reason to force the ship to stay. When that time came, they could only fight. Therefore, on this vast sea, on this ship, a very delicate balance was formed. However, the two sides of this balance were exceptionally passive and proactive. The reason why the Shinrong sect was passive was because they could not come up with an effective method that would not harm themselves. On the other hand, they had two different voices. One was to silence the other, and the other was to send him to the sect. Although these two businesses were to prevent information from leaking out, the process and results of the implementation were completely different. The reason why Zhong Xiaohua took the initiative was that although he knew that the Shinrong sect had evil intentions towards him, he only wanted to take the ship back to land. Just as Zhong Xiaohua thought, as long as I am careful and don't give you a chance, I don't believe that you will never reach land. And when you reach land, heh. Of course, the main reason why Zhong Xiaohua took the initiative was because of his powerful martial art. The people of the Shinrong sect had only seen his superb Qinggong and did not know the depth of his martial arts. However, Zhong Xiaohua knew clearly that even if he used his Qinggong to fight with them with a small sword in his hand, these people would definitely not be able to harm a single hair on his body. Not to mention, as long as he stayed in the cabin and used his divine sense to drive the small sword, he would be able to kill people like a ghost. Since the balance of power was in his hands, Zhong Xiaohua naturally led a carefree life. His cultivation was similar to when he was on the deserted island. However, in order to maintain an abundance of essential qi and deal with any unexpected situations, he temporarily stopped cultivating the blood of jade elixir core. When he cultivated at night, he placed restrictions all over his body to prevent himself from being ambushed when he was unconscious at midnight. In addition to comprehending the restrictions and formations, Zhong Xiaohua also took out a large amount of time to carefully read the first jade slip that Fire Dragon Zhenren had left behind. This jade slip contained a lot of common knowledge about cultivation and a large amount of basic spells. When he was on the deserted island, Zhong Xiaohua was too lazy to waste time on these things. After all, it had nothing to do with cultivation. However, now that he was about to step into the pugilistic world, where martial arts reigned supreme, if he only had an unparalleled essential qi but did not know how to use it, wouldn't he be as stupid as a rich man who had a treasure house but did not know how to use it? After another 10 days, Although he still did not see the shadow of land, he could often see the shadow of some ships in the distance. In his heart, Zhong Xiaohua knew that the land was not far away. This day, when it was close to noon, Zhong Xiaohua once again politely declined Bai Yonggui's invitation. He simply drank some water and ate some food. Then, he released his divine sense and covered the entire ship. In the cabin, seeing Bai Yonggui walking in, junior brother Li went forward and asked, "Senior brother Bai, is that guy still not coming down?" "Yes, he seems to have sensed something. No matter what, he does not even take half a step out. Could it be that our actions have made him suspicious?" "Nonsense, what actions have we taken? We are just discussing countermeasures together. He does not have clairvoyance and clairvoyance, how could he know what we are doing? Senior brother Bai is right. This guy is a cunning little fox, a coward. He immediately hid when he sensed the slightest movement and did not dare to come out again. He only ate so little. Even if we poisoned him, it would not work. How about we not send him water and food? What do you think? Ari, do you think I don't want to?" "But even if we don't send him water, do you think he does not know where we put it? He does not step out of his room. How would he know? If I say you are stupid, then you are stupid. If you had such a high qinggong, wouldn't you take advantage of the night to observe below the deck? This youth was born as a sea runner. In this aspect, he is more proficient than us. So, even if we don't send him food, won't he find it himself? So, after thinking about it, there are only two paths." Bai Yonggui said with a gloomy face. "Two paths. Senior brother Bai is truly brilliant. This lowly one is full of admiration. Even after racking my brains, I could not come up with even half an idea. Look at you, you're giving us two paths in one go. This lowly one is all ears." One of them flattered Bai Yonggui with a charming smile. Bai Yonggui was not in the mood to be flattered. He looked at the person angrily and said, "If you can't think of anything, don't be anxious. As long as you follow my plan, you will also be a good disciple of our Shinrong sect." The person shrunk his neck and felt that something was wrong. However, he still smiled apologetically and said, "Senior brother Bai, please tell me. Let's see if I have the ability." Bai Yonggui looked around at everyone and said, "The first option is for us to surround his cabin and find two people to rush in through the door and window to attract his attention. Then, the others will rush in from these two places. Isn't this bastard's qinggong powerful? Let's just stay in that cabin and make sure he doesn't have any space to move. I don't believe that we can't kill him." After he finished speaking, he pointed at the person who had just flattered him and said, "You, go in through the door. If you can successfully kill him, I will give you the merit." When that person heard this, his expression changed. He smiled and said, "Senior brother Bai, you must be joking. This little brother's martial arts are low, so it's better for me to help from the back. It's better to give this important opportunity to someone else." Bai Yonggui laughed coldly. He looked at the people who did not dare to look him in the eyes. He said angrily, "Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Now is the time when the Shinrong sect needs you." At this time, someone whispered, "Senior brother Bai, why don't you be the first to rush in?" Bai Yonggui asked loudly, Who said that?" Seeing that no one responded, he said, "Of course I am willing to be the first to rush in. However, as the saying goes, an army cannot be without a general. I still have to stay in the middle to ensure the successful completion of this operation. This young man is just an insignificant ripple. There are more and more important things that I need to do." "What about the second option?" someone asked. Bai Yonggui smiled and looked at the person. "This second option is something that I have discussed with your senior brother Chai for a long time. It can be considered a foolproof plan." Hey! Everyone's eyes lit up. They were all very surprised. "Our main purpose for going out to sea this time was to find this sheepskin scroll. Now that we have successfully completed our mission, I believe that the rewards from the sect will not be small. This young man who ran out to sea was just an accident. Preventing him from leaking information is a very professional job, and should be left to the experts. I think, Should we send the news back to the sect and let the sect leader send a specialist to solve this problem? When everyone heard this, they all clapped and said, "Good, very good." Bai Yonggui seemed to have expected this result and said, "Since everyone has agreed, then let's take it as a collective decision made by the dozen of us. Junior brother Li, I'll leave this matter to you." Time is ticking by and we should only be a few days away from Songluo City, right? Junior brother Yu hurriedly replied, reporting to senior brother Bai, "It is only 2 or 3 days away." "Good, then tell the sailors to slow down the ship. If necessary, we can take a detour. But senior brother Bai, the supplies on our ship are not enough. If we encounter a storm, we may not be able to safely reach the shore." Bai Yonggui glared at him and said, "No matter what, we have to hold on until we receive a reply from the sect. Otherwise, we may have made this trip in vain." Junior brother Li saw this and said, "Okay, senior brother Bai. I will immediately send a message to the sect." Bai Yonggui nodded, indicating that he should quickly go and do it. Not long after junior marshal brother Li entered the deck, a bird that was a lot bigger than a pigeon but a bit smaller than a falcon flew out from a small window. That bird circled above the ship a few times, and after determining the direction, it flew in a certain direction. Junior brother Li watched with satisfaction as the bird flew away. Only then did he close the window and return to the cabin to report. However, just as he closed the window, a black light flew out from the cabin on the second floor. It flew like lightning towards the bird in the distance. Chapter 3:11. That black light was the small sword driven by Zhong Xiaohua. Although the bird flew very quickly, the small sword was even faster and in a short while, it had caught up. The bird seemed to have sensed its pursuers and immediately increased its speed. As if it had been trained for a long time, it flew up, down, left and right as if it was trying to shake off the small sword. Unfortunately, the small sword had been through a battle with a wild seabird, and how could it be shaken off by this bird? In a short moment, the small sword was pressed against the bird's neck, and if it exerted a little more force, it would be stabbed to death. At this moment, the small sword suddenly shook off the bird and with a turn, it flew back like a bolt of lightning. The bird had just escaped death and gave a loud cry. Once it had identified the direction, it flapped its wings and hurriedly escaped from this sad place. Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense had been enveloping the entire ship, and he had seen Bai Yonggui and the others discussing how to deal with him. However, he did not have clairvoyant ears and did not know what they were talking about. When he saw junior brother Li going below the deck to write a note, he naturally paid close attention to it. Unfortunately, what he wrote was a mess, and even though he was used to reading ancient texts, he could not understand it. It was only when junior brother Li released the bird that he felt that the note might be unfavorable to him, and without hesitation, he released his flying sword with the intention of intercepting the bird midway. But the moment he made his move, he hesitated. Who knew if what was written on the note was related to him? He was only playing the role of a young boy who was running on the sea. It was just that he happened to be on the deserted island at the right time. The skills he showed on the first day were enough to frighten them. Moreover, along the way, he didn't see them pick up their weapons and do anything to him. Was he being too careful? Furthermore, he did not understand the contents of the note. If this note was related to matters regarding the ship's docking and he had intercepted it, the Shinron clan would not be able to receive the information on the note, and if it delayed the ship's docking, wouldn't he be painting feet on a snake? Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Zhong Xiaohua decided to withdraw her flying sword and stay still. Junior brother Li didn't know that his actions of writing the note and releasing the birds had been seen clearly by others. Their birds, which they thought were very secretive, were almost intercepted by others. They even happily returned to the cabin and reported to Bai Yonggui. When everyone heard that the bird had flown out, they all felt as if a huge rock had been lifted off their shoulders. They laughed and chatted for a while, recalling the hardships they had gone through on this voyage and looking forward to the rewards they would receive when they returned. Only then did they all return to Cultivate. Zhong Xiaohua watched as everyone laughed and chatted happily for a while before dispersing as usual. They didn't come up with any weapons. She couldn't help but feel puzzled. Could it be that she was thinking too much? The ship traveled on the sea for another 3 days. During this time, the ship's speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Sometimes, it would even constantly change directions. Bai Yonggui was very nervous. He was afraid that Zhong Xiaohua would come out of the cabin and question him. Unfortunately, Zhong Xiaohua was not the youth that he claimed to be. This guy had no sense of direction. When he was at sea, he couldn't even tell north from south. He even followed our suggestion and, just as he said this, Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense moved. 2 sailors turned around from the back of the ship. Zhong Xiaohua quickly jumped up and disappeared from her window. She waited for the 2 sailors to pass by before she came back down. At this time, Bai Yonggui said, "When the ship docks, we will cooperate with the 2 masters to take down this guy." The sect leader said that in order to ensure that nothing goes wrong, he specially invited a master with outstanding qigong. There will definitely be no problem. Fellow junior martial brothers, when the time comes, we will just surround him. As for the rest, the 2 masters will take care of it. We just need to take the credit. Everyone said, senior martial brother Bai's plan is good. Little brother admires it. Bai Yonggui waited for everyone to finish speaking before he said, "Fellow junior martial brothers, we will soon arrive at Pingning port. The sect leader instructed us to dock at an abandoned pier. The 2 masters will probably arrive on time. Everyone should go back for the time being. Have a good rest and recuperate your true qi. When the time comes, we will do our best for the foundation of the sect." Everyone stood up and said, "It is our duty to dedicate ourselves to the cause of the sect." Only then did everyone go back. Bai Yonggui called out to Junior Martial Brother Yu and said, "Junior Martial Brother Yu, inform the sailors that there is no need to take a detour or slow down. From now on, speed up to Pingning port." Junior Martial Brother Yu complied and left. When there was no one in the cabin, Zhong Xiaohua sneered. Just as she was about to return to the cabin, she heard someone talking inside. She heard Chai Feng say worriedly, "Senior Martial Brother Bai, did the sect leader say how to deal with this Ren Xiaoyaro? Will we capture him and bring him back to the sect or kill him on the spot?" Bai Yonggui sneered and said, "Junior Martial Brother Chai, you should put away your conscience. Although you and I made a poison oath on the deserted island, the oath only said that we will safely send this guy to land. It didn't say what we will do when we arrive on land." Chai Feng was speechless. After a moment, he said, "At that time, I didn't think too much about it. I just felt that this boy was innocent for getting involved in this muddy water." Innocent. There are many innocent people in this world. Since he came across Tan Wu's corpse, it means that this is heaven's will. If he doesn't take out Tan Wu's corpse, won't he not get involved? But if he doesn't dig out the corpse, will Senior Martial Brother Bai let him on the ship? About that. Who knows? If that's the case, won't he end up the same way whether he hands over the corpse or not? Bai Yonggui seemed to tacitly agree with Chai Feng's words. He didn't refute them, but his voice was a little loud as he said, "Aren't I doing this for the sake of the Shinrong sect? If this news spreads to Jianghu, won't we end up like the Tan family? We chased Tan Wen and Tan Wu for several years, and they died in a foreign land. Don't tell me you want us to end up like them." Chai Feng immediately shook his head and said, "Senior Martial Brother Bai, I don't have any other thoughts. I just feel that this boy is being treated unjustly. He has already delivered what we want, yet we still have to kill him." Bai Yonggui sneered again, "Put away your senseless pity. Do you know why the sect leader gave you a death order to listen to me this time? Isn't it because of your indecisiveness? If it weren't for you last time, we would have killed and captured Tan Wu on Yangming Mountain. How could we have let him escape overseas?" Chai Feng heaved a long sigh and didn't say anything else. Bai Yonggui didn't let him go and said, "Don't think that you can extricate yourself from this. Only one of the senior Martial Brothers' disciples, who disguised himself as a jade shopkeeper, was able to establish a little bit of contact with a young master of the Tan family who liked jade. Before falling asleep, Zhong Xiaohua was quite gratified. With Bai Yonggui's instructions, the ship went directly to the shore. When the sky was bright, the shadow of the coastline could already be seen in the distance. Of course, it was only a shadow. In Zhong Xiaohua's cognition, this shadow represented hope. This shadow meant that he was one step closer to his family. Of course, Zhong Xiaohua, who already had sailing experience, also knew that although the coastline looked very close, it was hard to say how long it would take to reach the shore. Perhaps Zhong Xiaohua was the only one who was eager to return home. In his divine sense, the people of the Shinrong faction were meditating with their eyes closed. They were accumulating their primordial qi. They probably knew that once the ship reached the shore, there would be a fierce battle. A fierce battle that they were not confident of protecting themselves. Although their opponent was only a very ordinary-looking youth, who knew who this youth would pull down as a scapegoat when he fought like a cornered beast? Zhong Xiaohua looked at their serious expressions and suddenly felt a trace of amusement in his heart. There was also a trace of a feeling of looking down on them. His heart moved. Could it be that this was the feeling of being in a high position? Yes, this is the feeling of having a card up one's sleeve. Everything is under control. Or rather, it's a feeling of transcendence. Everything has nothing to do with me. Although they are afraid of me and think of ways to control me, what about me? I see these as insignificant tricks. I see the dangerous road as a smooth road. Even the experts they invited are not in my eyes. This feeling of being in the situation but floating outside is really strange. After thinking about it, Zhong Xiaohua understood. He did not practice the Big Dipper magical fist. He did not remove the restriction around him and closed his eyes to meditate. He had already realized that this kind of state of mind was more valuable than the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra could be done step by step and progress step by step, but the state of mind came too randomly. Fortunately, seeing that they were about to reach the shore, the people of the Shinrong sect also wanted to pass the last part of the journey peacefully. No one came to disturb Zhong Xiaohua. Even the sailor who delivered the food, after knocking on the cabin door for a long time, did not see anyone open it. He only placed the food at the door and ignored them. He must have received instructions from someone else. However, when evening came and the port was already in sight, Zhong Xiaohua's cabin door still did not open. Only then did the sailor panic and report it to Junior Marshal Brother Li. Junior Marshal Brother Li was also puzzled. Although Zhong Xiaohua's cabin door was usually closed, the food was always taken in. Could it be that something had happened when they were about to reach the shore? Naturally, he did not dare to be negligent and quickly went to find Bai Yonggui to discuss it. On the way back to the shore, Zhong Xiaohua was a thorn in their hearts. They could not touch him. It was not easy to get the faction leader to send experts to deal with him. If he disappeared, they would not be able to hand him over. Thus, they might end up with a bad ending. Bai Yonggui was more attentive. Bai Yonggui was more attentive. After hearing the report, he wasn't in a hurry to see what was going on. He first asked the sailors about the situation last night. After knowing that there weren't any ships that passed by, he was relieved. He smiled and said to everyone, since there weren't any ships that passed by last night, then this young man must still be in the cabin. He used to hide in the cabin, so he must have seen that we're going to dock today. He's not a fool, so he naturally knows that there won't be any good results when we dock. So he hid in the cabin and thought of a countermeasure. As long as we guard carefully and don't let him escape, it will be a great merit. Junior Brother Li said uneasily, but, Senior Brother Bai, if he really is not in the cabin and we can't hand him over when we reach the shore, what should we do? Haha, that's easy. Junior Brother Li, I will give you a task. Go to the cabin and ask that little brother to come out. How about it? Ah, me? Oh, I also agree with Senior Brother Bai's opinion. The sea is vast and there are no ships passing by. No matter how good his qigong is, he can't be in the water and not sink. He must still be in the cabin scratching his head. Everyone chuckled, thinking the same thing. Bai Yonggui waved his hand and asked the sailor to come forward. He said, "Go to the cabin door and watch carefully." "That's right. Find another person to go to the deck and watch the window. If there are any changes, quickly report to me." The sailor saw that the others did not dare to go, so he was also timid. "It doesn't matter. He will not make things difficult for people like you. There is no harm in going." Chai Feng sighed and said. The sailor looked at him nervously and did not dare to say anything. He carefully walked away. Bai Yonggui waved his hand and said, "Everyone, we are about to reach the shore. Everyone, according to the positions we discussed before, take your positions. Before the ship reaches the shore, we still have to stand on guard. Once the ship reaches the shore, hey." When everyone heard this, their expressions turned cold. They did not dare to be careless. They quickly took their swords and went out according to the previous agreement. The port was getting closer and closer. Dusk was also approaching. Under the dusk, the deserted port looked incomparably bleak. Today, however, was different. There were already a few people standing on the shore, looking up. Chapter 313. This pier used to be a good harbor. Large and medium-sized ships could directly dock at the shore. It used to be very lively, but in recent years, it had become deserted, which was very strange. However, businessmen valued profits. Since Pingning Port could also provide a good channel, who would care about the reason why this pier was deserted? The ship slowly approached the shore, but Zhong Xiaohua's cabin door still did not open. Bai Yonggui was half happy and half worried. He was happy that the ship had finally reached the shore. Seeing that the sect leader on the shore had sent reinforcements, he could finally hand over this hot potato. He was worried that the youth with excellent qigong still hadn't come out. Could it be that, as junior brother Li guessed, he had sneaked away last night? However, if he had to open Zhong Xiaohua's cabin door himself, he really didn't have the courage. Looking at the four people on the shore, Bai Yonggui couldn't help but secretly wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. After thinking for a while, he called everyone and jumped onto the shore. There were 4 people standing side by side on the shore. 2 of them were around 23 or 24 years old. They were wearing grey robes and hats. One of them was holding a long sword, and the other was holding a long crescent moon shovel. The 2 people standing on both sides were dressed in martial attire. They were about 40 years old, and all of them were holding long swords. Although the 2 people were old, they seemed to be very respectful to the 2 people in the middle. They lowered their heads and said something. Of the 2 people in the middle, one closed the door and didn't say anything. The other one replied occasionally. They weren't arrogant, but they were extremely indifferent. Bai Yonggui led everyone to the shore. He first saluted the 2 young people in the middle and said, "Greetings, masters." One of them nodded, and the other still closed his eyes and ignored him. Then, Bai Yonggui saluted the 2 men in martial attire and said, "Li Li, Deacon Chen, you came in person." The dark and fat man laughed and said, "Little Bai, don't call me Hall Master. It's better to call me Vice Hall Master Li." Bai Yonggui smiled and said, "Li Li is a good name. If this trip goes smoothly, I think Li Li will definitely go one step further. I'm not wrong to call you that." "Good, Xiao Bai. I like what you're saying. Your contribution this time is not small. I won't forget it. Also, the people behind you will all be heavily rewarded." Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed and cupped their fists to express their thanks. Bai Yonggui took a step forward and was about to say something when he saw Li Li give him a look and asked, "Xiao Bai, where is the expert you mentioned? How come I only see you guys and not that person?" Bai Yonggui didn't know what to say. Seeing Bai Yonggui hesitate, Li frowned and said, "Did he escape?" Bai Yonggui hurriedly explained, "Mr. Li, it's a misunderstanding. We're keeping a close eye on him. Why would we give him a chance? That's strange. Where is he?" Bai Bai Yonggui pondered for a moment before taking a step forward. At this moment, the young man said impatiently, "If you have something to say it out loud. Why are you whispering?" Li Li also scolded, "Xiao Bai, if you have something to say, just say it. Our Shin Rong sect has nothing to hide." Bai Yonggui said awkwardly, "Mr. Li, that young man didn't escape. He's just hiding in the cabin and won't come out. We don't dare to call him." Hearing this, Mr. Li's heart was as clear as a mirror. He scolded, "You bunch of useless things. If you don't even have the guts, how can you still survive in Jianghu?" However, he looked at the two young men. Seeing this, the young man seemed to understand something. He smiled and said, "Well said, Mr. Li, since your leader invited us here, let us do this." Hearing this, Mr. Li put on a smile and said, "That's good. Then we'll have to ask the Grandmaster to do it." At this moment, someone suddenly said, "Grandmaster? Where are you Grandmasters from?" When everyone looked back, they saw an ordinary young man standing on the high bow of the ship. Seeing this, Bai Yonggui hurriedly said, "Mr. Li, Grandmasters, it's this young man." After saying this, he waved to the others. The others all jumped back and surrounded the dock in a semicircle. Seeing the reaction of Bai Yonggui and the others, Mr. Li smiled and thought, "Not bad, children can be taught." Then, Mr. Li took a step forward and cupped his fists to Zhong Xiaohua. "Little brother, I am Shinrong Sect's Luo River Hall's Vice Hall Master Li Minute. Under the order of our leader, I invite you to our sect for a while." He didn't mention Zhong Xiaohua's alias at all. It was as if he was sure that Ren Xiaoyaro wasn't his name. How could Zhong Xiaohua believe him? He said in a clear voice, "Vice Hall Master Li, many thanks for your sect leader's kind intentions. However, this one has been overseas for a long time. It would be better for me to stay here for a year and a half. When I have time, I will pay a visit to your sect leader. Then," he added, "I'll remember your sect's kindness in bringing me back from the deserted island. I won't tell anyone." Zhong Xiaohua thought that the two masters invited by the Shinrong sect were elders with strong martial arts. Only now did she know that the masters were two monks. The hats on their heads were obviously to cover their bald heads. He knew that the Shinrong sect wouldn't want the sheepskin scroll to spread, so he didn't leak anything when he spoke. His words clearly told Mr. Li that he wouldn't reveal anything about the sheepskin scroll. Although Hall Master Li understood the meaning behind his words, he had received a death order. How could he dare to show any mercy to his subordinates? He could only smile and say, "Little brother, you're thinking too much. Our sect leader likes young talents the most. He was very happy when he received the news and sent me to welcome you. If you don't go, wouldn't you be letting down our sect leader's painstaking efforts?" Zhong Xiaohua laughed coldly and was about to speak. The thinner monk next to him said, "This benefactor, you should listen to Vice Hall Master Li. If you let this little monk fight, it won't be good. It won't be good if you get injured." Zhong Xiaohua smiled and said, "If I go with you, what will you say? Will I just leave like this?" "Ahem," Mr. Li laughed dryly and said, In order to show little brother's sincerity, I'll have to ask this great master to seal little brother's acupoints. Of course, it's only a few simple acupoints and won't have any effect on the body. When we arrive at the sect, we'll immediately undo little brother's acupoints. Our sect leader is also waiting to apologize to little brother and hold a welcoming banquet." Ha ha ha, Zhong Xiaohua laughed loudly, as if she had heard the funniest thing in the world. The monk next to him frowned and said, "Vice Hall Master Li, why are you wasting time with him? Just directly take him down. Try peaceful means before resorting to force. Try peaceful means before resorting to force." Mr. Li explained. After Zhong Xiaohua finished laughing, she was about to speak when she heard a clamor from the side. Zhong Xiaohua looked up and saw that it was a crow on a huge weeping willow on the shore. Even with so many people, the crow didn't fly away. It was a strange thing. Zhong Xiaohua rolled her eyes and said loudly, "Where did this crow come from? It's so noisy, it's really unpleasant to hear." After she finished speaking, she stood up and held a long sword in her hand. From the high ship, she directly flew towards the weeping willow. Seeing this, the skinny monk's eyes lit up and praised, "Good Qinggong." At this time, the monk who had his eyes closed also opened his eyes. His eyes flashed for a moment before he closed them again. The huge weeping willow was outside the encirclement of the Shinrong sect people. When Bai Yonggui saw Zhong Xiaohua jump out, he led everyone to follow Zhong Xiaohua's figure and flew outside. When Zhong Xiaohua landed, she was right next to the weeping willow, but she was still surrounded by people. Seeing this, Zhong Xiaohua wasn't nervous. Her right hand exerted force and stabbed her long sword into the ground. She looked at Mr. Li and smiled. "This crow is very noisy and always says some nonsense. Watch how I deal with it." After she finished speaking, she walked to the side of the weeping willow. She bent down and wrapped her arms around the thick trunk. The trunk was very big and Zhong Xiaohua couldn't even wrap her arms around half of it. However, Zhong Xiaohua didn't mind. She took a deep breath and shouted, "Rise tilde tilde." Then, he exerted a little strength with his arms, and the ground shook. The huge weeping willow was pulled up a few inches. The weeping willow was huge, and its crown was the size of a few houses. The roots under the tree were even denser, almost covering the entire dock. Zhong Xiaohua exerted his strength, and it was tantamount to causing a small earthquake in the dock. Zhong Xiaohua originally wanted to pull out the entire weeping willow. However, after pulling out a few inches, she found that the roots were too big. Although she was strong, she couldn't pull it out completely. Thus, she changed her mind and pushed. The weeping willow fell crookedly to the ground. The nest on the tree fell to the ground and the crow naturally flew away. After pushing down the weeping willow, Zhong Xiaohua clapped her hands and said, "With this, the world is finally peaceful." Seeing this scene, the dozen people from the Shinrong sect who surrounded her were all dumbfounded. Their eyeballs almost fell to the ground. Yuan Shan's eyes widened and his face turned ashen. He clenched his teeth and used all the strength in his body to resist. In everyone's ears, they heard a loud crack sound. Yuan Shan was actually half a head shorter and his whole calf sank into the ground. Then, with a puff sound, Yuan Sha spat out a mouthful of blood and shouted, "Good." The strength in his hand weakened by half. Then, with another puff sound, he spat out another mouthful of blood and said, "Good." The crescent moon spade became a little shorter again. Yuan Sha's arm trembled slightly. Then, with another puff sound, he spat out another mouthful of blood and said, "Good." The crescent moon spade also fell to the ground with a clang sound. Yuan Sha spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood and his body collapsed. Unfortunately, his whole calf had sunk into the ground and he could not fall down even if he wanted to. Zhong Xiaohua's long sword fell on the top of Yuan Shan's head. When the thin monk not far away saw this, he was shocked and shouted, "Don't take my senior brother's life." Before he finished speaking, the monk had already stabbed the long sword in his hand towards Zhong Xiaohua's glabella. His lightness skill was like an arrow leaving the bowstring. Even Zhong Xiaohua was shocked when she saw it. Unfortunately, with Zhong Xiaohua's divine sense, she had already seen the long sword's momentum. When the long sword reached her body, she slightly tilted her head and dodged. The long sword missed. The thin monk was also outstanding. When he saw the long sword miss, he first used a sword flower to protect his body. Then, he flipped in the air and faced Zhong Xiaohua, continuing to stab. Zhong Xiaohua had no intention of harming Monk Yuan Sha's life. The long sword in his hand only touched Monk Yuan Shan's head. Soon after, he did a somersault and floated high into the air, dodging the long sword once again. He casually threw his long sword at Chai Feng, who was surrounding him. The skinny monk originally wanted to ask about Zhong Xiaohua's situation in detail. However, when he saw Monk Yuan Shan's dispirited and listless appearance, he said, "Senior brother's injuries are serious. I have to bring him back to the temple for treatment. You guys deal with the aftermath here. When I return to the temple, I will report this matter to the elders. You guys should also hurry back to the temple." After he finished speaking, he did not stay any longer. He carried Monk Yuan Shi on his back and used his qinggong to immediately leave. When Li heard this, he smiled and said, "If that's the case, then I will reluctantly do it. If the credit is yours, then it is yours. Others can't take it even if they want to. Don't you think so, little Bai?" Bai Yonggui smiled and said, "Li is right." Li carefully took the iron box and opened it under the cover of dusk. After confirming that there was no problem, he carefully put it away. He looked at the dozen or so disciples around him and waved his hand. "Everyone, you are all meritorious members of the Shinrong faction. When you return to the faction, you will be greatly rewarded. Let's go, we will return to the faction and receive the reward for your qinggong." "Okay." When the others heard this, they were all happy. The fear from being beaten up just now disappeared. They followed Li in a certain direction under the cover of dusk. Killing one person in 10 steps, unstoppable for 1,000 miles. Awesome. At this moment, Zhong Xiaohua only wanted to scream. He really liked the feeling of being in control of his own fate. He used his qinggong to leave the pier, but his divine sense did not leave. He understood the reactions of the people around him. When he was far away, he retracted his divine sense. His body flashed and disappeared. He actually burrowed into the ground and moved stealthily. Then, he jumped out from somewhere and randomly found a direction. He used his qinggong to run in all directions. After that, he used his qinggong to move stealthily for a long time. He did this a few times until it was late at night. He then came out and looked around. There was a small village in front of him. Zhong Xiaohua was overjoyed. He moved stealthily and found a huge pile of wheat in a wheat field. He hollowed out the middle of the pile of wheat and entered it. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate. After coming out from the pleasure of being in control of the situation, Zhong Xiaohua had a trace of vigilance in his heart. He was just in the initial stage of qi refining.